Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I broke into that old house on a Tuesday night. I had a camera bag slung over my shoulder and a flashlight in my hand. The boards on the windows were loose enough for me to pry one aside and slip through. I was looking for striking photos to boost my portfolio. I wanted shots that would make people stop and stare. I thought an abandoned place would give me exactly what I needed. I expected creaking floors and dusty furniture. I didn't expect anything else. I never believed in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. I just liked dark, rundown settings because they made good material for my pictures. But what I found in there still makes my stomach tighten every time I think about it. The front room smelled like mold and damp wood. The air felt heavy and it was colder than it had been outside my flashlight beam. Cut through the dust particles floating around me, I heard my own breath. My pulse thudded in my ears. I tried to ignore the chill on my neck as I stepped farther inside. The door was stuck, so I couldn't open it from the inside, which meant I had to remember the way back to the window. I glanced back to make sure I could still see the opening. I told myself I'd keep track of every turn so I wouldn't get lost in there. I walked into what looked like an entry hall. The walls were cracked. There were old picture frames lying on the floor. The wallpaper had peeled off in big sheets. I could see nails sticking out where pictures might have once hung. I looked around with my flashlight and noticed the staircase to the second floor. The steps looked weak, but I planned to go up there later if it was safe. I heard the wind outside and it made the boards in the roof groan. At first I thought I heard footsteps upstairs, but I told myself it was just the old structure settling. I set my camera bag down and unzipped it. I pulled out my DSLR and attached my wide-angle lens. I flipped on the camera's power and tested my flash. It worked fine, but the sudden light made me blink. My heart was beating a little faster than usual. I told myself it was just excitement. I love taking photos in locations like this. There's a certain thrill in capturing images nobody else has taken. I adjusted my camera settings for low light and took a few shots of the hallway. The flash lit up the walls and I saw flakes of paint drifting down. Nothing seemed strange. I checked the display. The pictures looked sharp enough. I moved through the first floor, snapping shots of old furniture and broken windows. I knelt near a table covered in debris. I took a close-up of some shattered glass and a dusty mirror. The mirror still had cracks in it, but the reflection was visible. I tried to photograph my own reflection to get a dramatic effect when I checked my camera screen. I noticed something odd behind me. It was a faint outline of what looked like a figure, but it was blurry. I narrowed my eyes and looked over my shoulder. There was nothing there. It was just an empty room. I assumed it was a trick of the light or some smudge on the mirror. I kept walking, taking pictures every few steps. There was a kitchen area in the back. The counters were torn apart and a few cabinets hung by their hinges. The sink was full of rusty water. It smelled stale. I tried not to breathe too deeply. I clicked a few shots of the sink and turned around to photograph the doorway. I saw something move in my peripheral vision. It looked like a shadow passing across the far wall. I spun around, heart thumping. I pointed my flashlight at the wall. There was nothing. The wind outside picked up again and the whole place creaked. I started to feel a tightness in my chest. I thought, maybe it was just stress from being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I checked my watch. I decided I'd be in and out in. Under an hour, I took a few more shots of the kitchen, including one of the warped old refrigerator door. I heard a faint scrape behind me, like a chair sliding on the floor. I turned fast, but I didn't see a chair. It was just bare floor and some scattered debris. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe slowly. I moved on. I found a narrow hallway leading to a small bathroom. The door was half off its hinges. I nudged it open with my foot. The smell of mildew was strong and there was a broken toilet on its side. The mirror above the sink was shattered. There was a large chunk missing, so I couldn't see my entire reflection. I raised my camera and took a picture with flash. As soon as the flash went off, I heard something creak behind me. I whipped around with the flashlight again. There was only an empty hallway. I looked at the camera display. My reflection in the broken mirror seemed normal, but on the right side of the shot near the bathroom door, there was a shape. It looked like part of a shoulder and a head, but it was transparent. My throat tightened. My first thought was that I'd captured some weird reflection or maybe a lens flare, but it looked too much like a person. I tried to blow it off, but I couldn't ignore the easy feeling in my gut. My hands shook a bit as I stepped back into the hallway. I decided to check the second floor. Maybe I'd get some better shots up there, and then I could leave. As I climbed the stairs, each step creaked under my weight. I kept my flashlight trained on the steps to make sure they didn't collapse. I heard faint tapping sounds behind the walls, like pipes knocking. I tried to keep my mind on the photos, but I felt a tingling at the base of my neck. My mouth went dry at the top of the stairs. I saw a long corridor with several rooms on each side. Some doors were closed and others were ajar. The hallway carpet was torn and covered in dust. I took a few photos aiming the flash down the hall. That's when I noticed a shape at the far end. It was just for a split second as the flash went off. It looked like a figure standing in the doorway. But when my eyes adjusted, I didn't see anyone. My chest tightened again. I started thinking maybe someone else was in the house. I kept telling myself it had to be a squatter or another photographer. But the place felt empty, and I hadn't seen signs of recent activity like fresh footprints or leftover trash. I walked toward that doorway. My legs felt tense. My footsteps sounded too loud on the floor. I tried not to think about that shape when I reached the doorway. The room was dark, the curtains were drawn, and the only light I had was from my flashlight. There was a large bed frame with no mattress. I could see bits of stuffing and cloth on the floor. There was an old dresser against the wall, missing half its drawers. I raised my camera and took a series of shots. The flash lit the room in short bursts. With each burst, I felt like something was flickering at the edge of the light. I stepped over to the dresser. The surface was covered in dust, and there was a small hand mirror lying there. The glass on the mirror was intact, but it was cloudy. I aimed my camera at it and snapped a close-up when I checked the display. I saw a face reflected in the glass. It wasn't mine. It was a pale face with hollow eyes, like someone standing next to me. My stomach flipped. I swung my flashlight around the room, breathing hard. There was no one there. My hands started shaking so much that I had trouble holding the camera steady. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. My mind started racing. I asked myself if I was losing it. I rubbed my palms on my jeans and told myself to keep calm. I considered leaving right then, but I wanted to see if these weird images would keep appearing. It felt like a mystery. A part of me was terrified, but part of me was curious about what my camera was capturing. I wiped sweat off my forehead and forced myself to stay a bit longer. I went back into the hallway. I noticed a door at the very end. It was closed. I tried the knob. It turned, but the door was stuck. I shoved my shoulder into it. It burst open with a loud crack. My heart jumped. I swallowed. Stepped inside and found a smaller room, maybe an office or a study. There was a big wooden desk in the center, covered in dust and spider webs. The window was boarded up, so the room was pitch black. Except for my flashlight beam, I took a breath, raised my camera, and snapped a few pictures of the desk and the walls. When I looked at the screen, I saw faint shapes at the edges of the frame. They looked like people standing in the corners. There were 2 or 3 of them, barely visible, like silhouettes made of mist. My chest felt tight. I pointed my flashlight at the corners. I saw nothing but peeling wallpaper. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. My mouth was dry and my temples throbbed. I took another picture and the shape seemed closer, like they had moved in a split second. I jerked back and bumped into the desk. I dropped my flashlight and it rolled across the floor. My camera strap was still around my neck, so I didn't draw that, but I had to scramble to pick up the flashlight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I flicked the flashlight around the corners. Were empty, but I felt a presence. My mind went blank. I muttered a few curses under my breath and backed out of the room. I stumbled into the hallway. I could barely keep my breathing steady. I told myself I needed to leave. Enough was enough. As I hurried back toward the staircase, I kept hearing small sounds around me. A click here, a scrape there. It felt like something was following me. I made it to the top of the stairs and aimed my flashlight down. The steps seemed to stretch out. Like the descent was longer than before, I forced myself to move step by step, trying not to trip on the broken boards. My heart raced, my shirt stuck to my back. I heard what sounded like light footsteps behind me. I whipped around my camera, swung and bumped my chest. The hallway was empty, but the temperature felt even colder. I thought I saw a faint movement at the corner of my eye. I pointed the flashlight. Nothing. I practically jogged down the last of the steps, skidding on dust and debris. My foot caught on a loose board, and I almost fell forward. I dropped to one knee, cursing under my breath. I pushed myself back up and shone the flashlight around, panting. The front room was quiet. The same dusty furniture and broken windows greeted me. I felt the tightness in my stomach again. The only exit I knew was the window I'd PRI open. The front door wouldn't budge from inside. I turned left, then right, trying to remember which way I'd come in. My pulse hammered. I spotted the A kitchen. I remembered going through the kitchen, so I headed that way. I reached the kitchen, scanning the area with the flashlight. The door leading outside was blocked by a heavy board nailed across it. I found the hallway that led back to the front window. I had to squeeze by a broken dining table and a stack of rotted chairs. I reached the window only to see that the board I had PRI loose was mostly back in place. It didn't look hammered, esh cut. It looked like it had been gently pushed back so that the gap was smaller. I felt panic tighten my chest. I gripped the board and tried to yank it. It squeaked as I pulled and it came loose again. I took a step back, lifted my camera bag and squeezed through the opening. I almost fell onto the overgrown grass outside. I sucked in the fresh air and felt my heart pounding like crazy. My palms were slick with sweat. I turned and pulled the board back in front of the window. Not sure why I even bothered. My shoulders were tense. I walked around to the front yard, shining my flashlight on the old facade of the house. The windows were all dark. The place looked dead and still, but my gut churned. I felt like something watched me from inside. I went straight to my car, which I'd parked a block away. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone on the sidewalk. No one was there. The street was silent except for a stray cat digging in a trash can when I reached the car. I fumbled for my keys. My hand shook so much that I dropped them. Once I got in, locked the doors and tried to steady my breathing. The air in the car felt hot and suffocating, so I rolled down the window a crack. I looked at the camera on the passenger seat. Part of me wanted to delete every photo I'd taken, but I couldn't do it. I needed to see them on a bigger screen. I needed to figure out what those shapes were. I started the car and drove away. My chest was tight and my throat felt dry every time a streetlight cast a shadow on the sidewalk. I jumped. I took the quickest route back to my apartment. I rushed upstairs, locked the door, and set my camera on my desk. I hesitated for a minute, then turned on my computer. My pulse still hadn't settled. I transferred the photos and opened them on my monitor one by one. I clicked through them. Most were normal, but then I reached the ones from the bathroom mirror. The shape of a person's shoulder and head was there, almost translucent. I zoomed in, no detail on the face, just a faint outline of a jawline and some darkness where eyes should be. I clicked to the pictures in the upstairs hallway. In one shot, there was a silhouette at the far end. In the next shot, it was gone. Then I saw the study photos. The corner images were even worse on a bigger screen. I could see 3 distinct shapes. Each one looked humanoid but transparent. They appeared to be leaning forward as if watching me. When I clicked to the final shot in that sequence, they were closer, almost in the center of the frame. My chest cramped. The shape in the middle had what looked like an arm reaching out. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. I realized my hands were trembling. I shut off the monitor. I stared at the black screen, trying to calm down. I haven't shared these pictures with anyone yet. I'm not sure what to do with them. Part of me thinks they might be worth a lot. People love a good ghost story, but every time I look at them, my stomach knots. I keep remembering how cold the house felt and how the boards creaked behind me. I remember the face in that little hand mirror. It was close to me, but I never saw it in person. I still don't believe in ghosts. At least not in the usual sense, but those images show something I can't explain. I keep thinking about how the board over the window was put back, almost like the house didn't want me to leave that easily now. Whenever I lie in bed, I feel like someone's standing by my bedroom door. Sometimes I get up and check, shining my phone's flashlight around. There's never anything there, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that place. I saved the files on an external drive and locked it in a drawer. I'm not sure if I'll ever open them again. Maybe I'll forget about them someday, but every time my phone buzzes or my floor creaks, my mind goes back to that old house and I get a jolt of fear, like a static shock running through my chest. I don't think I'll ever do an urban exploration by myself. Again, I can't walk into a place like that without thinking about those shapes, those faces I couldn't see. Until after the flash, I can still feel that cold air on my neck when I think about it. And I keep expecting to see one of those silhouettes right behind me, just out of sight, waiting for me to take another photo. I was sitting behind the wheel of my old truck, rain hammering the windshield. Without pause, my hands were tight on the steering wheel and I felt a strange tension creeping into my neck. The headlights lit up at a narrow rural road that seemed to stretch on forever, and the storm refused to let up. I was soaked in sweat. Even though the air inside the cab was cold, I had a deadline to meet and wanted to get through that old back road fast, but something was off. From the moment I turned onto it, I noticed strange shapes in the darkness, but I tried to focus on the road. Then I saw her, a woman, standing on the shoulder just outside the glow of my headlights. She didn't move or wave. She stood there with her arms at her sides, looking right at me. I can't explain why I didn't stop or slow down. Maybe it was my nerves. Maybe it was the way her eyes caught the light for a split second. I looked at her for a moment. Then I pushed my foot down on the gas. I felt my heart pounding. The woman disappeared behind me and the road kept going, but something didn't feel right. My palms were damp and the wipers thumped at a fast speed against the windshield. The thunder and lightning seemed louder than usual. Every time a flash lit up the sky, I expected to see her again. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the storm or my tired mind. I hadn't slept well in a couple of days. My last delivery had taken longer than expected, and I was running on cheap coffee and energy drinks. The truck's engine rumbled in front of me, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles looked pale. The wind rocked the cab, and the rain pounded on the roof. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirrors every few seconds. The darkness behind me seemed to press in, but I didn't see her back there. I told myself to calm down. A few minutes later, I spotted her again. She was on the right side of the road. This time near a broken fence, I saw her form in the edge of the headlights. Same stance, same stare. She wasn't waving or trying to flag me down. She just stood there, wet hair plastered to her face, dress clinging to her body, both hands hanging at her sides. I felt a jolt in my chest. I glanced at the speedometer. I was going well over the limit, but it still felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. My legs felt twitchy and there was a nervous tingling in my stomach. I kept going. The road twisted and turned and the storm kept hammering down. The trees were tall and close to the pavement. My headlights lit up a narrow tunnel of rain and branches. I saw the shape of the woman again, this time on the left side near an old sign that was too rusted to read. The sight caused me to jerk the wheel. I fought to keep the truck centered. My chest felt tight and I forced air in and out of my lungs. The wipers couldn't clear the water fast enough. I squinted at the road. I decided to turn on the radio. I wanted some noise to fill the silence in the cab. The radio only hissed with static. I tried scanning for stations, but I couldn't pick up anything. The static rose and fell, and sometimes it sounded like a feigned voice, but then it vanished. I turned it off. The rumble of the engine and the rain against the windshield were the only sounds left. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It showed a time that didn't match what I expected. According to my original plan, I should have been on the main highway by now, but the road in front of me just went on and on with the same old trees and broken fence posts, the same patches of washed-out gravel. I kept my high beams on, but it only lit more rain and more of that endless pavement. My back was tense and my shoulders hurt. I tried to keep my focus straight ahead, but a flash of lightning revealed the woman. Again, she was on the shoulder closer this time. I saw her wet face and I noticed her eyes were wide open. I couldn't make out their color, but I could see enough detail to know she was staring right at me. My heart thed like a drum in my chest. I felt a pulse in my neck and my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to roll down the window and shout at her. But something about her presence made me want to get out of there fast. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The truck's engine roared and I felt the vehicle pick up speed. Water sprayed up from the tires. The wind pushed against the side of the truck and the trailer behind me rattled. I kept glancing at the odometer. The numbers climbed, but the road never changed. I tried to see if there were any driveways, side roads, or turnoff. I saw nothing. It was just an old rural highway with tall weeds and broken fences on both sides. The fence posts looked crooked like they had been there. For decades, time dragged my eyes burned from staring at the dark. My head felt foggy. Then I saw her again only a few yards ahead. She stood right in the path of my headlights. I braked hard and the tires screeched on the wet pavement. The truck skidded and my chest slammed into the steering wheel. Pain shot through my ribs and I gasped. I looked up expecting to see her right in front of the hood, but there was nothing there, just the road and the rain. My breath sounded loud inside the truck. My chest rose and fell. I strained to see into the darkness. I thought I saw a figure move at the edge of the trees, but it was too dark to be sure. I sat there in the middle of the road, wipers slapping the engine, rumbling and idle. My headlights lit up the water streaming down the pavement. Rain battered the roof with a steady thump. My heart wouldn't slow down. The seatbelt felt tight across my shoulder, so I loosened it a little. I glanced in the side mirror. No one was behind me. The road was deserted. I put the truck into gear and started rolling forward again, my hand shaking a bit on the wheel. I tried to come up with a plan. Maybe I should have turned around and gone back. But every time I thought about going backward, I felt a chill. I had this idea that the road behind me would look the same as the road ahead, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just wanted to find some sign of civilization, maybe a gas station or a small town. Anything to break this pattern, but nothing appeared. The storm felt endless, and my eyes kept darting to the mirrors, expecting to see that woman behind me. I started talking to myself. Calm down, it's just a bad night. You took a weird detour, you'll get out of it. Just keep going. My voice sounded shaky. My throat was dry. I grabbed a water bottle from the cup holder and took a long drink. The water tasted stale and my hands were trembling. I set the bottle down and noticed my phone on the passenger seat. I had tried calling someone earlier, but I had no signal. I glanced at it again, but there was still nothing. No bars, no data. The screen just showed the time. It was well past when I should have. Then at my delivery point, the tension in my gut built up again when I spotted her shape in the distance. This time she was standing next to a sign that said, "Rest area 2 miles." I hadn't seen that sign before. I could have sworn there was no rest area along this old road. But I was desperate. I thought maybe if I reached it, I could take shelter and figure out what was going on. The woman didn't move. Her clothes were pressed against her skin by the wind and her hair stuck to her face. My pulse ham in my ears, I drove past her, focusing on the sign. It was old and covered in rust, but it clearly said there was a rest area 2 miles ahead. The road was slick and my shoulders ached from tension. I kept checking the distance on the odometer. After a few minutes, I should have been at the rest area, but nothing appeared. The road just kept going. Then I saw another sign. It also said rest area 2 miles, the same shape, the same rust. My stomach twisted, my breath came out in shallow bursts. I saw the woman again. She was next to the second sign, standing in the same way. Looking at me, her gaze was locked on my truck. My skin crawled. I stomped on the gas and the engine wind. The trailer shook. I pushed past 60, 70, 80. The road was narrow and the truck shook from every bump. The headlights lit up. The rain, lightning flashed, and thunder cracked so loudly I felt it in my chest. Water sprayed across the windshield and the wipers struggled to keep up. My mind raced. I knew I was risking hydroplaning, but I kept my foot on the pedal. My heart pounded and my arms felt stiff as I gripped the wheel. The rest area sign was nowhere to be found. The only things around me were trees, fences, and darkness. I passed another sign with the same message. Rest area 2 miles. I cursed under my breath and felt sweat trickle down my temples. I glanced at the fuel gauge I had started the night with a full tank. But I had been driving for a long time. The needle was dipping lower than I liked. My thoughts raced if I didn't find a real exit. Soon I might run out of gas in this storm on this strange road. I imagined myself stuck with that woman lurking somewhere in the rain. My heart pounded harder at that thought. Then I saw a faint glow up ahead. It looked like old lights on a pole, maybe part of a rest stop area. I slowed down, trying not to skid, and I pulled into a small clearing. There were 2 flickering lights attached to broken poles. The pavement was cracked, and I saw a boarded-up building that might have been a restroom or an information booth. Puddles covered the ground, and the water reflected the weak light in dull patches. I parked the truck and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab felt heavy except for the rain drumming on the roof. I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the dark. I didn't see anyone. I put on my jacket, took a flashlight from the glove box, and carefully opened the driver's door. The wind splashed rain on my face, and I shivered. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, showing me wet concrete weeds coming through the cracks and old trash on the ground. The air smelled like damp leaves and mud. My boots sank into the wet ground, and water soaked my jeans almost immediately. I walked around the building. The door was chained shut, and the windows were boarded up. I saw no sign of the woman. I felt my pulse in my neck. I listened for movement, but I only heard the rain and the wind. Lightning flashed overhead, lighting up the clearing for a second. I thought I saw someone standing near the tree line. I aimed my flashlight, but there was nothing. My breath trembled, and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I tried to use my phone again, holding it above my head, but there was still no signal. The screen was wet, and my finger slipped over it. I wiped it on my jacket and shoved it back in my pocket. Then I heard something. It sounded like a wet footstep on pavement. I spun around, aiming my flashlight at the noise. I saw the woman standing a few yards away near the edge of the light. She was dripping with water. Her hair stuck to her face. Her eyes locked on mine. I froze. My mouth went dry and my shoulders tensed. She didn't speak or move closer. She just stood there breathing. I could see her chest rise and fall. My heart thumped in my ears. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt tight. My body felt shaky, and I was scared of what would happen. If she walked closer for a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I clenched my jaw, stepped backward, and fumbled for the truck door. I kept my eyes on her. She didn't approach. She just watched. I yanked the door open, got inside, and slammed it shut. The windows fogged up with my breath. My hands shook as I jammed the key in the ignition and turned the engine over. It caught on the first try. Headlights swept across the rest area, but I didn't see her in the beam. I shifted into reverse, backed up, and then steered back onto the road. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt every beat in my chest. I pressed the accelerator. The trees and fences straw by on both sides. I kept my eyes moving, checking the mirrors and the road. The storm was still raging, and the thunder seemed constant. The truck lights reflected off the wet pavement. My chest was tight. I needed to get out of that place, but the road never ended. There were no intersections or signs for any real town. There was only the occasional rest area 2M sign repeated again and again. Every few minutes I would see her on the roadside. Sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. Each time I saw her, she was closer to the edge of the pavement. At one point, I caught a glimpse of her in my side mirror. She was right behind the trailer, walking along the white line on the shoulder, keeping pace with me. Even though I was going at least 50 mph, my stomach churned. I pressed the gas harder, and she vanished into the darkness, but I knew she would appear again. I started feeling dizzy from lack of rest. My eyelids felt heavy, and my muscles were tense. I fought to keep the truck steady. My neck ached. I tried to check the time again, but the clock on the dashboard showed the same numbers as before, as if it hadn't changed. I flicked the light above me and looked at my watch. The hands weren't moving, it was stuck on the same moment. I had glanced at it hours ago. I slammed a fist on the steering wheel. My voice came out in a shaky whisper. What is happening here? I scanned the trees for any sign of a different road or a driveway. Nothing. Just the same fence posts and the same weeds. The woman kept appearing, sometimes only for a split second in the headlights, sometimes standing still as I passed. My legs were sore from maintaining speed and braking. Whenever she popped up ahead, the tension in my shoulders was almost unbearable. My eyes burned from staring at the rain. I lost track of how many hours had passed. The same loop repeated, endless road storm. The rusted signs and the woman's figure, I felt a gnawing panic in my chest. My throat was raw from breathing hard. My clothes stuck to my skin with sweat. Each time I tried to blink and gather my thoughts, I snapped my eyes open again, afraid I would crash or see her in the middle of the road. My mind was racing with no real solution. Eventually, I saw a small bridge over a narrow creek. The water rushed under it. I recognized the broken railing on the side. I had passed it before. That meant I was driving in circles or the road was looping on its own. My stomach dropped, my heart felt hollow. I pressed the brakes and pulled over. I listened to the rain on the roof and I forced myself to take a few slow breaths. I tried to organize my thoughts. My only plan was to keep driving and hope something would change, but that had gotten me nowhere. As I sat there, I glanced out the passenger window. The woman was there, standing at the edge of the road facing the creek. She had one hand resting on the broken railing. The water raged. Below, I could hear it even through the storm. She didn't look at me this time. She just stayed there. Her shoulders drenched, her hair plastered to her head. My chest felt tight and my heart pounded in my ears. My mouth was dry and my skin tingled. I wondered if I should step out and try to speak to her, but my body refused to move. My instinct screamed at me to stay inside. I gripped the wheel again, turned the key, and merged back onto the road. The path ahead was the same dark stretch of broken asphalt, and I knew it would go on without any clear exit. The headlights showed the falling rain and the thunder rumbled. I kept my eyes forward, searching for any sign that the road might end or change my mind. Told me I might never see a normal highway again. I pushed forward even though my arms were heavy and my head felt light. The trailer rattled behind me and the engine droned on. I thought about the next mile, the next turn, hoping something new would appear. The woman would keep appearing closer and closer until I finally accepted there was no way off this strange stretch of road. But I kept driving, clenching my teeth, ignoring the trembling in my hands, waiting for anything to break this endless loop. The headlights sliced through the darkness. The rain pounded on the windshield and the wind battered the cab. My eyes stayed locked on the black top, searching for a way out. But I didn't see any. I only felt the wheels, rolling on and on through the storm with my heart hammering. The woman appeared again on the shoulder, closer than ever. Her eyes watching me as I passed. I couldn't look away, and I couldn't stop. I just drove, caught in a cycle that refused to end. And in that moment, I knew there was no simple escape from that forgotten road. I remember the first night I heard the strange interference on my radio show. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting alone in the small studio. I had my usual cup of lukewarm coffee on the table, the same worn-out notepad at my side, and the phone lines open for any listener who wanted to share a story. The fluorescent light above me buzzed and the old air conditioner rumbled. Every few minutes I felt a mild ache in my lower back from sitting in the same chair for hours. I introduced myself on the air, gave a quick rundown of the night's topic, paranormal encounters, and waited for calls. I was used to getting strange stories at that hour, but I never expected anything beyond local gossip and spooky rumors. I certainly never expected a voice to break into my broadcast. My name is Lucas, and I run a late-night segment called Midnight Mysteries at a small radio station in a quiet town. We're not a big operation. There's just me in the studio and my friend Marcos in the adjacent control room. Though he usually works earlier shifts and rarely stays past midnight on that night, I was completely alone. The station is a single-story brick building off a narrow road near a field. There's a dusty parking lot in front and a worn wooden door that creaks every time I walk through. Inside, the walls are thin, and sometimes I hear the old pipes knocking behind them. I began the show like always. I leaned toward the microphone, stated the phone number for our call-in line, and reminded the listeners to share any unexplained experiences they might have had. The phone line stayed quiet for a few minutes. I sipped my coffee, which tasted bitter, and stared at the small digital clock on my desk. The second hand blinked in red digits. I cleared my throat, repeated the phone number, and tried not to think about how lonely I felt in that dark studio. Right then, the static came through my headset. It was brief. It sounded like a whisper, and then disappeared. I paused, adjusted the volume, and asked if anyone was on the line. No one answered. I brushed it off. Technical glitches happen all the time. Our equipment is old. The microphone stand squeaks when I move it, and sometimes the audio levels drop for no reason. I tapped the dial, hoping to fix any loose connection. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the control panel, saw the blinking light, and pressed the button to put the caller on the air. I greeted them and asked for their name. That's when I heard something I can't quite explain. It was a deep voice, but it wasn't a normal human voice. It sounded like it was right next to my ear. Even though I was alone, it said, "I see you." It was clear and direct. I felt a jolt in my stomach and jerked back in my chair, almost knocking over my coffee. I checked the line. It still showed an active call, but no one responded to my questions. The voice vanished. I began to sweat. My palms felt clammy and my breathing got heavier. I took a moment to gay myself. I asked again if anyone was there. Only silence. I disconnected the call and decided to move on. Maybe some prankster had managed to do something to the feed. I kept my show going. I turned on some background music for a moment and took a quick walk around the tiny studio, trying to calm my nerves. The air felt cold near the door. I noticed a faint draft from the outside, which made sense because the door doesn't close tightly. I told myself everything was fine. Then the phone rang again. I hurried back, sat down, and hit the button. This time I heard a woman on the line. She sounded out of breath. She introduced herself as Denise and told me she had been listening. She asked if I had heard that weird whisper before I picked up. I told her about the previous call. She said she had recognized her own street name mentioned right before the static cut off. I asked her to repeat that. She said that voice said it knew where I lived. I felt my throat tighten. I asked for more details, but she said she was scared and wanted to hang up. I tried to calm her down. She stayed on the line for another minute, explaining that she'd heard loud scratching sounds on her back door while the voice was on air. Then, without warning, the line went dead. I sat there in silence with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone. My heart pounded. I shifted in my chair and felt a dull ache in my neck. I tried to reassure myself that it was a hoax, but I couldn't shake the unease. Something about her voice sounded real. I decided to keep broadcasting. I shared the details of the strange calls with my listeners. I asked them to call in if they experienced anything similar. I expected more jokes, maybe some nonsense. But the next call came in right away. The next caller was a man named Rolfo. He said he worked the night shift at a gas station on the edge of town. He told me he was standing outside for a smoke break when he heard the radio from inside the store. He said he didn't believe in any of this paranormal stuff, but while he was listening to my show, he heard the same deep voice behind him. He turned around, but no one was there. He rushed back inside while he was talking to me. I heard the store door slam in the background. He yelled something like, "What do you want?" Then all I heard was static. After a few seconds, the line cut out. I tried calling him back. It rang and rang, but no one picked up. I felt my mouth go dry. I looked at the clock. It was 2:38 a.m. My shift was supposed to end at 4 a.m. But I considered shutting down early. I stood up and walked to the door of the studio. I opened at a crack and peered into the hallway. The hallway was dark and the overhead lights were off because we rarely use that part of the building at night. I listened for any sounds. All I heard was the faint hum of the air conditioner. I closed the door and locked it from the inside. Then I went back to my seat. I stared at the microphone, thinking about the next words. I should say my hands shook. I tried to grip the arms of my chair to steady myself. The phone rang again. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. My hands trembled as I pressed the button. I heard a burst of static, and then the same deep voice came through. It sounded clearer this time. It said my name. It said, "Lucas, you're not safe." My entire body tensed up. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. My heart hammered against my chest. I asked who it was. The voice said, "Stop asking." Then the line went silent. I stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, my headphones buzzing with quiet static. I announced to the listeners that I was experiencing technical issues. I apologized for the interruptions. Then I started playing a short music track to fill the silence while I tried to figure out what to do. My stomach churned. I felt lightheaded. I took a sip of water from a small bottle on my desk and coughed because I swallowed too fast. I decided to call Marcos, my coworker. Even though it was late, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered. In a groggy voice, I told him about the calls, the interference, and the strange voice. He told me to stay calm, keep the broadcast going, and record everything if I could. He sounded tired, but he promised he would drive over to the station as soon as possible. While I waited, I switched back from the music track to the live mic. I spoke directly to whoever might still be listening. I said that something unusual was happening. I asked anyone with information to call in. My voice shook a little and I tried to hide my fear, but I'm sure the listeners noticed. I looked at the phone lines. All 5 lines were lit up. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe the town's people wanted to help or share what they were experiencing. I answered the first call. It was a listener who said they heard banging on their window while the deep voice crackled on their radio. They ran to the window and saw nothing but an empty yard. They sounded scared, but they had no explanation. I quickly took the next call. A different person said they heard footsteps around their house after the broadcast glitch. They locked their doors and grabbed a baseball bat. They kept repeating that this felt too real to be a prank. Their breath was shaky and they hung up without saying goodbye. I looked at the studio door again. It was still locked. I noticed my reflection in the small window. My face looked pale and my hair was damp with sweat. My pulse throbbed in my ears. The next caller was crying so hard I could barely understand them. They said the lights in their house kept flickering. Then they heard an animal like a growl coming from their living room. They ran to their bedroom and called me from there. I heard a loud thump in the background and the call cut out. I started to feel a tingling in my arms and legs. The atmosphere in the studio felt heavy, like the air was thicker. I tried to breathe slowly. My heart wouldn't slow down. I told myself to stay focused. I had a responsibility to maintain the show, or at least keep everyone informed. I considered shutting off the transmission, but part of me thought it might be safer to keep the lines open so people could communicate. I stared at the microphone. I felt trapped in my own station, surrounded by calls from terrified residents. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 3 a.m. I told myself that Marcos would arrive soon. I answered another call. This one was from a man who sounded calm. He said his name was Rafa. He said he was parked outside the station in the empty lot. He claimed he saw movement through the window. I asked if he meant he could see me through the window. He said, "No, I saw someone else behind you." My entire body went cold. I slowly turned in my chair, half expecting to see a figure in the corner. I saw nothing but the dusty walls and the table with spare headphones. I told Raphael I didn't see anyone. He insisted there was a silhouette moving in the background. Then he stopped talking. I heard him drop the phone or something. The line stayed open, but he didn't respond again. I hung up and felt my stomach tighten. I stayed still for a few seconds, listening to the faint hum of the equipment. A moment later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They sounded slow and deliberate. My chest tightened. I remembered I had locked the door, so I told myself no one could enter. I watched the doorknob. It stayed still. The footsteps faded, and I was alone with my heart pounding in my ears. I took off my headphones for a second, put them on the table, and rubbed my eyes. I glanced at my phone to see if Marcos had texted me. Nothing. Then the studio lights flickered. I looked up worried the power might go out. They went back to normal after a second. I noticed the phone lines had all gone dead. There were no more incoming calls. The on-air light above my head glowed red. I tapped my microphone and asked if anyone could hear me. The station was silent except for a faint hiss of static. The scoreboard on my control panel showed we were still live. I said my name again and asked if any listener was out there. No response. I waited, feeling a growing sense of unease. My throat felt dry and my back ached from the tension. That's when the voice returned, but it didn't come through the phone line. It came through the main broadcast feed. It overrode my microphone. I heard a low tone, almost like a growl, and then the deep voice spoke again. "You can't escape." It was so loud I yanked off my headset. My ears rang the same message repeated 3 times. I covered my mouth with my hand and stood up. I walked to the door, unlocked it, and peered into the hallway. The lights were off, but I could see the exit sign at the far end. I didn't hear anything else. My arm felt weak and my knees were unsteady. I decided to head for the exit. I left the studio door open, jogged down the hall, and pushed on the front entrance. It swung open without a sound. Outside, the parking lot was empty. There were no cars, no sign of anyone named Raphael. I walked around to the back of the building and saw nothing but weeds and an old dumpster. I stood there under a dim street lamp, breathing in the cool night air. For a few seconds, I considered leaving the station altogether, but I remembered Marcos might be on his way. I didn't want to abandon him to a locked building or a dark parking lot. I went back inside. The hallway felt colder than before. I closed the door behind me and checked the studio. Everything was exactly as I left it, except the phone lines were still down. The broadcast feed was a loop of static. I switched off the transmitter for a few seconds, then switched it back on. The static stopped, replaced by quiet. I tried to speak into the microphone again. My voice came through, but it sounded distant, like I was underwater. I cleared my throat and gave a final announcement. I told anyone listening that we were ending the show early due to technical problems. Then I shut down the console. I checked the time. It was 3:40 a.m. I sat in my chair for a while, staring at the dark monitor in front of me. My body felt drained. I leaned forward. Resting my elbows on the desk, I could still feel my heart racing. After a few minutes, I heard a car pull up outside. I stood up, walked to the front, and saw Marco stepping out of his car. He jogged to the entrance. I unlocked it, and he walked inside. He looked at my face and asked if I was okay. I told him about the calls and the voice. He nodded and said he believed me. We walked together into the studio. Everything was quiet. Marcos flipped a few switches, checked the equipment, and said all the settings were normal. I pulled out my phone to see if there were any messages from listeners or from the station manager. Nothing. Morrow suggested we do a quick check of the building. We walked the hallway, the break room, and the tiny storage closet. We found no one when we finished. I thanked him for coming. He offered to stay until morning. I agreed. We sat in the break room and sipped coffee. Not saying much. We didn't mention ghosts or demons or anything else. We just sat there listening for any sounds. I haven't heard that voice again since that night. We still run the radio show, but we changed the format. We don't take live calls anymore. We ask listeners to send messages or emails. Instead, some people in town claim they still experience strange things during the early hours, but they have no proof. I just know what I heard and how it made me feel. My hands still shake a bit when I think about it. I keep telling myself it was a random interference or a cruel prank, but deep down I remember the cold sensation in that hallway, the repeated message in my ears, and the panic in the voices of the callers. I can't forget it. I just hope it never returns. I took this temporary caretaker job at an old abandoned hotel because I was out of work and out of luck. The ad said, light maintenance, light cleaning, short-term contract. It promised free room and board for a month. That sounded good enough for me. I wasn't expecting much. I thought I'd just be sweeping dusty floors and making sure the windows weren't broken. But from the moment I arrived, I felt uneasy. The front doors squeaked, the lobby smelled like stale air, and the place felt too big. Even with the lights off, I noticed my own reflection in the glass front doors. It looked hazy. I tried to ignore it, but that was just the start. I got here on a Thursday afternoon. The person who hired me gave me a quick tour, then handed me an old key and said they'd be back in a few weeks. I remember setting my suitcase down in the lobby and looking around the ceiling. Had old chandeliers that didn't work anymore. The front desk was coated in dust. I kept thinking this place is bigger than I expected. The building had 4 floors, plus an attic, plus a basement. Most of the doors to the rooms were locked, but the main hallway mirrors caught my eye right away. They were tall and framed in ornate gold. The glass looked normal at first glance, but when I walked past them, I felt like my reflection lingered a split second behind my movement. I tried not to freak out. I chalked it up to my imagination. I'd been traveling all morning and I was tired. I dragged my suitcase up a flight of creaky stairs to the caretaker's suite. It was a small room at the end of the second-floor hall. The bed had a thin mattress and the walls were a dull beige color. The window overlooked the empty parking lot. I set my stuff down and decided to explore a bit before dark. I wanted to see if any of the lights worked. I flipped a few switches in the hallway. A few overhead lights flickered, but some died. Right after turning on others, buzzed loudly. I also noticed a large mirror at the end of the corridor. It was about my height. With the same ornate gold frame, I walked toward it, peering closely at my own face. I didn't notice anything strange at first. Then I took a step back and I saw my reflection smiling. I swear I wasn't smiling at all. My face was completely neutral, but in the mirror, my reflection had a slight G. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I looked away. I told myself maybe I twitched or something and I misread my own expression. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to open a few windows in the hallway. I hoped fresh air would help me calm down. A mild breeze pushed through the corridor, making some old curtains move. The breeze felt good, so I took a minute to lean out the window and breathe. I looked outside, trying to focus on normal things like the parking lot and the overgrown shrubs. That's when I heard a faint scraping sound behind me. I spun around. There was no one there, just that big mirror reflecting the hallway. But in its reflection, I saw a dark shape move across the floor. It slid from left to right past the locked doors. I jerked my head toward that spot in the real hallway. It was empty. My heartbeat sped up. I forced myself to walk slowly toward the mirror and look into it again. All I saw was me in the hallway with dusty walls and old carpeting behind me. No dark shape, no movement. I took a few deep breaths and decided to go downstairs. I wanted to check the main lobby again, maybe see if there was a fuse box or something else to do. Anything to distract me. The main lobby had a few tall mirrors near the front desk. They all matched the same style gold. Frames, elaborate designs at the corners, and old glass that might have been installed decades ago. I flicked on some lights near the front desk, but they only glowed weakly. The rest of the area stayed dim. It felt weird to see my reflection in so many angles. I walked behind the counter. I found an old ledger, some keys, and a maintenance checklist. I saw check mirrors typed in the list that made me pause. Why would a caretaker checklist include mirrors? There was also a note about items in basement must remain locked. That note was scribbled in the margin, no details, no signature. I decided to stop looking at that list and just get on with my job. I grabbed a broom from a nearby closet and swept the lobby floor while I worked. I kept glancing at the mirrors. My chest felt tight and my stomach was tense. My scalp tingled. I tried to look at my reflection to see if anything was weird. Sometimes it looked normal, but sometimes I thought I saw a flicker of something else in the corner, a shadow that wasn't shaped like me or a slight difference in the background. I stuck to my sweeping. After maybe half an hour, I started to sweat. I felt like someone was watching me. I kept turning around. Nobody was there. By the time I finished, dusk was creeping in. The front windows showed a red-orange sky. I decided to call it a day. I went back upstairs to the caretaker suite, closed the door, and locked it. I made a quick dinner with some canned beans and crackers I'd brought. The room had a small fridge and an old microwave that still worked after I ate. I paced around. I wasn't sure if I should try exploring more or just go to bed early. My nerves felt shot. I was tired, but I didn't want to sleep yet. Finally, I decided to walk around the second floor and see if I could open any doors. Most of them were locked, but I found one that led to a storage closet. I stepped inside, pointed my flashlight around. I saw spare sheets, towels, and a few decorative pieces wrapped in cloth. One was another mirror. It was leaning against the corner. I unwrapped it a bit and saw the same gold frame. The glass was cracked in the corner, forming a small spiderweb pattern. I felt a prickly sensation in my hands. I wrapped it back up and left on my way out. I heard a low whisper, but I couldn't make out words. It felt like my ears were playing tricks on me. I shut the closet door and hurried back to my room. My breathing was shallow and I kept telling myself to calm down. I lay on my bed fully clothed with the blankets pulled over me. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I kept thinking about the note on the checklist. Items in basement must remain locked. I wondered if that had something to do with the mirrors. I planned to check the basement the next day, but I still felt uneasy. My eyes started to drift shut after a while. I had trouble staying awake, and eventually I dozed off when I woke. It was early morning. Sunlight peered through the thin curtains. My back felt stiff from sleeping in my clothes. I stood up, cracked my neck, and tried to shake off the grogginess. I remembered my plan to check the basement, so I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The basement door was near the main lobby behind a locked gate. I used the caretaker's key, which fit the lock. The metal gate screeched as I pushed it open. The basement stairs were steep and unlit, so I moved slowly. The basement smelled damp. My flashlight showed stone walls and a cement floor. There were some crates and wooden boxes stacked along one side to my right. I saw a series of old mirrors placed against the wall. Some were upright, some leaned at odd angles, and a few had blankets over them. My pulse quickened. I approached them and lifted one of the blankets. The mirror underneath had a hairline crack near the top. I shined my flashlight on it. I noticed faint streaks like smudges from someone's hand on the other side of the glass. Suddenly, I heard a shuffling sound behind me. I spun around. Nothing moved in the darkness. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but the edges looked strange. The corners of the reflection were darker. I thought I saw shapes shifting behind me in the reflection. I flicked my flashlight around again. The basement itself was empty, just the crates and the silent gloom. But in the mirror, it looked like something passed between the crates. I stepped back, breathing hard. My shoulders felt tight, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I replaced the blanket. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I checked a few of the crates instead. Most were nailed shut, and I didn't feel like prying them open. One of them had a label that said Hotel Inventory Mirrors. It looked like this place had a lot of mirrors in storage. That made me uneasy. I had no idea why they'd need so many or why they'd hide them in the basement. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard a voice. It came from the far corner near a large mirror that was half covered by a cloth. It sounded like someone clearing their throat or quietly trying to speak. I froze in place. Then I took a few cautious steps forward. My flashlight beam landed on the cloth, which shifted slightly. I felt a jolt of panic. I wanted to run, but my curiosity pushed me to lift the edge of the cloth underneath. I saw a tall mirror, maybe 7 feet high, with swirling designs on the frame. The glass was dark. I couldn't see my reflection. At first, then it flickered to life as if it took a moment to catch up my reflection. Looked at me, but my eyes in the mirror seemed to shine brighter than normal. My chest tightened and my mouth went dry. That's when I heard a whisper. Soft, and right next to my ear it said, "Let us out." I dropped the cloth and staggered back. My flashlight almost slipped from my hand. My mind raced. I hurried to the stairs before I climbed them. I felt a sudden pressure in my head, like a headache, but sharper. My vision blurred for a second. I gripped the railing, breathing through my teeth. The pressure faded, so I forced myself to move. I made it back to the ground floor and locked the gate behind me. My hands were shaking. I went straight to the caretaker's. Sweet and slammed the door. I paced around for a few minutes trying to calm down. I felt sweat on my forehead. My heart was pounding. I tried to think logically. There must be some explanation. Maybe the old glass warps images. Maybe the basement has echoes or drafts, but the whisper I heard was clear. I didn't imagine it. Something down there was aware of me over the next few days. I did my best to handle my caretaker duties. I swept floors, checked the plumbing, opened windows for ventilation, but everywhere I went, mirrors greeted me. Some were cracked, some were dirty, some had sheets draped over them. I started avoiding my own reflection. I felt like each mirror wanted me to look at it, wanted to grab my attention. Sometimes I heard faint voices once. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but they stopped whenever I turned around. My nights were restless. I woke up soaked in sweat, with the sound of whispers fading from my ears. I kept the door locked, but that didn't help much with my sense of dread. On my 5th day, I decided to remove a mirror in the 3rd floor hallway. It was a tall, narrow mirror with the same gold frame. I brought a screwdriver and tried to detach it from the wall while I was doing that. I felt something pull at me from behind. I stumbled and the screwdriver clattered to the floor. I spun around, fists clenched. Nobody was there, but the mirror's reflection showed a dark shape. It looked like a figure made of shadows. No features, just a silhouette leaning over my shoulder. I stared at it, cold sweat running down my temples. My eyes darted back to the actual hallway, nothing in the reflection. The shape slowly moved out of sight. I heard a faint laugh that sounded like metal scraping on stone. My limbs felt weak. I sank to my knees, breathing fast. Then the silhouette in the reflection raised its arm. My reflection did nothing. I could see it clearly, like someone else stood behind the glass. My stomach churned. I couldn't handle it. I grabbed the top of the mirror and yanked the frame, popped off the brackets with a loud crack. The mirror fell forward. I staggered back, letting it drop flat on the floor. It hit with a dull thud, but the glass didn't shatter. I felt a sudden rush of relief. It was like the mirror lost its hold on me once it wasn't upright. My breathing slowed, but my hands were still shaking. I realized then that the hotel's mirrors weren't just decorations. They held something inside them. There were entities trapped behind the glass, and they wanted out. They wanted to use me to walk around in the real world again. That idea made me feel sick. I picked up the mirror carefully and slid it into a nearby closet. I shut the door, hoping that would keep it from bothering me. I considered leaving the hotel right then, but the contract said I only had to stay a few more days, and I wasn't sure if I'd get paid. If I abandoned the job, I also worried that if I ran, those entities might find some other way to follow me, so I decided to endure it a little longer. I stuck to the 1st and 2nd floors, and I tried to avoid looking into any mirrors. I kept myself busy with chores. Every so often I heard faint whispers or felt a tug at the back of my mind. I tried to resist it by focusing on practical tasks. I swept, I cleaned windows, I tested all the lights when I passed a mirror. I kept my gaze on the floor. My gut stayed tight and my shoulders felt stiff. My appetite went down. I felt a growing ACH in my temples whenever I was around too many mirrors. Once I heard my own voice whisper my name from behind me, I refused to turn around on my final day. I woke up feeling shaky but determined to get out of there. I packed my bag and left by the front desk. I had a few last items on the checklist, like making sure the side doors were locked and turning off certain breakers while I worked. I saw reflections move on. Their own. In the corner of my eye, I ignored them. I heard distant whispers begging me to come closer. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to keep moving. My mind felt hazy, and I sensed that something was trying to get inside my thoughts. I focused on the real world. The dust in the air, the sound of my boots on the floor, the weight of the keys in my hand. After finishing, I grabbed my things and stepped outside into the late afternoon light. I took one last look at the building. The windows were dark, and I could see my reflection faintly in the glass door. It looked normal for a moment, then I saw a slight distortion near my shoulder. I turned away, heart pounding, and walked to my car. My body was tense and I felt goosebumps on my arms as I started the engine. I refused to look in the rearview mirror until I was well down the road. I still think about what happened there. I know those mirrors weren't ordinary. I don't have a fancy explanation. All I know is I saw reflections that didn't match reality, and I heard voices that wanted me to set them free. I'm glad I got out before something worse happened. I never went back, and I never plan to. If anyone else takes that caretaker job, I hope they understand what they're dealing with, because those mirrors are not just mirrors, and that hotel is not just an empty building. It's a prison full of entities that want a way out, and I was almost the key to their escape. I'm done with it. I won't let them use me, and that's all I have to say. I still remember how my heart thumped when I first stepped inside that old theater. The main door stuck a little, and I had to push hard just to get in. Dust floated in the air, and I tasted it. When I took a breath, my throat felt dry, and my skin tingled from the stale air. That place smelled like old costumes, damp wood, and something else I couldn't identify. The silence weighed on me. I could hear my own breathing and the slight creak of the floor beneath my shoes. I told myself I was ready for anything. I had no idea what was waiting for me. My name is Paul. I've been an actor most of my life. A few years ago, I started losing roles to younger guys or sometimes to older guys with better reputations. I'd get the occasional commercial or small part, but it never felt right. My agent called me one afternoon. He had this strange offer. Some local theater company wanted to put on a classic play in a building that had been shut down for decades. They needed an experienced actor to fill the lead role. The pay wasn't great, but it was a job. I said yes because I missed the stage. I missed that rush of saying lines in front of an audience. Even if that audience was small when I arrived for my first rehearsal, nobody was outside. The street was empty and the building looked dark and abandoned. I tried the front door. Like I said, it stuck. I forced it open and stepped into a wide lobby. The ceiling was high-chipped paint, covered the walls, and the lights in the old chandeliers were off. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I was in the right place. Then I heard a soft sound coming from somewhere deeper inside. I followed that sound into the auditorium, rows of seats stretched out in front of me, covered in a thin layer of dust. The stage looked solid enough, though some of the curtains were torn at the edges. I waited for someone to greet me. Nobody showed up. I started walking toward the stage. My shoes echoed in that large space, and every step sounded too loud. I climbed the steps to the stage and stood there. My palms felt clammy. It reminded me of my first audition. Years ago, I looked around trying to see any sign of life. That's when I noticed a script resting on a small table near the edge of the stage. It was my role. I picked it up. A note on the top page said, "Begin rehearsal block, Act 1." It felt like a strange instruction. There was no stage manager, no director, no other actors. Just that note. I shrugged and started reading lines out loud. I figured maybe someone was testing me. I projected my voice, enunciating each word as I reached the middle of the scene. I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like a chair sliding. I turned around fast, but nothing moved. I tried to brush off the uneasy feeling, but my skin was prickling. I finished the scene and waited. No one answered. No one clapped. I stood there for a few seconds listening. Then I heard faint footsteps above the stage, like someone was walking across the catwalk. I looked up. I couldn't see anyone. I called out, asking if someone was there. The footsteps stopped. My heart was beating hard. After a minute, I lowered my script and decided to explore the backstage area. I headed behind the curtains and found a narrow corridor with old sets piled against the walls. Wooden boards, paint-ed backdrops, and broken furniture were stacked in corners. I saw a small dressing room with a mirror that had cracks in the glass. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. I felt around and found a flashlight on the makeup counter. I turned it on and the beam shook a little. Because my hand was unsteady, the corridor looked even more cramped under the flashlights. Glare, I walked slowly, hearing my own footsteps on the creaky floor at the end of that corridor. There was a door that led to a dusty storage room. I scanned the place. Props and costumes were piled everywhere. The smell of mothballs made my nose itch. While I looked around, I heard that same faint sliding sound I'd heard on stage. It came from behind a tall rack of costumes. I lifted the flashlight and pointed it in that direction for a second. I thought I saw a shadow move like someone stepped out of sight. My heart jumped. I walked over and pushed the costumes aside. There was nothing there except the wall. I swallowed and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself it was just my imagination. I went back to the stage, hoping that maybe the director or someone else had arrived. The auditorium was still empty. I felt tense, so I decided to leave for the day. I left the script on the table and walked to the lobby. The door was still slightly jammed and I had to yank it open again. The sunlight outside felt comforting. I almost laughed at myself, thinking I was spooked by an old building. I went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about those sounds. The next day I came back. I arrived in the afternoon, figuring more people would show up. The door was already unlocked. I found a single light on in the center of the stage. It lit a small circle. Everything else was in shadow. My script sat on the table again, open to a different scene. A new note said, "Block back 2. I hesitated for a moment. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't walk away. I wanted the role. I wanted to prove I still had it in me. I stepped into the light and started rehearsing as I spoke. The silence around me felt thick. At some point, I heard a soft scraping noise from the far side of the stage. I kept going. My voice sounded shaky to my own ears, so I paused to calm myself. Then I continued. Suddenly, I heard footsteps again. They stopped right behind me. I turned around quickly. I saw a faint shape, almost like a person standing in the dark. Then it vanished. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My body felt cold. I didn't know if I should call out. I just stayed still for a moment, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The shape was gone. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. Eventually, I shook my head and told myself to focus. I needed to finish the scene. I forced the words out, but my voice sounded dull to me. I tried to imagine an audience. I tried to remember my training when I reached the final lines of the act. I heard a single clap from somewhere in the darkness. It was just one clap, like a polite acknowledgement. "Hello," I said, speaking toward the seats as someone there. No response. I stepped off the stage and walked between the rows. My shoes left prints in the dust on the floor. I aimed my gaze at the upper boxes, the balconies, and the control booth in the back. Nobody was there. I felt an urge to leave again, but I wanted answers. I looked around for a switch to turn on more lights. I found a panel near the entrance to the auditorium. I flipped a few switches and some overhead lights flickered on. They were weak and buzzed a bit, but they gave me a better view of the place. The seats were old with torn upholstery, the walls had water stains, and parts of the ceiling showed cracks. I didn't see anyone. I decided to check backstage again. I carried the flashlight with me, even though some overhead lights were on. Now the corridor felt just as cramped as before. The smell was the same too. My stomach tightened when I remembered the shadow. I thought I saw the previous day. I pushed forward. I peeked into the dressing rooms. Everything was the same. I noticed a stack of new costumes in one corner of the biggest dressing room. They looked clean, not dusty like the others. I walked over and picked up one of the jackets. It fit my role's description. I wondered who left it there. I rehearsed a bit more that day, doing my lines on stage, waiting for any sign of the mysterious director or stage manager. Nothing happened. No new noises, no shapes. When the sun started going down, I switched off the lights and left the pattern continued for a few days. I'd find a note telling me which scene to rehearse and practice my lines. Sometimes I'd hear faint footsteps or see a flicker of a shadow near the curtains. Other times I'd spot the shape of a person in a balcony seat. Then it would disappear. When I moved closer, my nerves were on edge and I was losing sleep. At the same time, I felt drawn to the place. Something kept me there. Maybe it was a strange sense of duty, or maybe I craved that rush of performing again. I'm not sure. One afternoon, I decided to film a bit of my rehearsal on my phone. I set up the phone on a chair and pressed record while I was on stage. I felt that presence again. I could hear soft footsteps in the wings. My stomach clenched, my hands shook. I forced myself to keep speaking the lines when I Finished, I ran to my phone and stopped the recording. I played it back in the lobby, standing near a window for better light. I heard my own voice reciting the script. Then I heard a faint whisper. I couldn't make out the hair on my arm. Stood up at one point in the video. I saw something pass behind me on stage. It was blurry, but it looked like a person dressed in dark clothing. The whisper on the recording made my chest tighten. I tried to replay it a few times. It sounded like a single word, but I couldn't be sure. It might have been my name, or it might have been something else entirely. I started to sweat. The building felt hot and cramped. I wanted to get some air, but I also wanted more proof. So I went back on stage. I shouted that I wanted to see who was there. My voice echoed a door slam somewhere in the distance, then silence. I looked around the old set pieces behind the curtain. I found a narrow staircase leading up to the catwalk. I climbed it. The steps groaned under my weight at the top. The catwalk stretched over the stage. I felt my legs shake a bit because I'm not fond of heights, and the railing looked rusty. I shone my flashlight along the path. I saw ropes, old sandbags, and dusty spotlights. Nobody was there, but I smelled something like old perfume. It wasn't strong, but it lingered. I stayed there for a moment, my heart pounding. Then I went back down. A few days later, I arrived at the theater later than usual. The sun was going down. I noticed a light in the lobby that hadn't been on before. When I entered, I heard faint music coming from the auditorium. It was an old tune, something from a long time ago. It sounded like it was playing on a record. My skin prickled. I followed the sound to the stage. One single spotlight shone on the center again. This time there was no script on the table. Instead, there was a program with my name listed as the lead. The other roles had names I didn't recognize. The year on the cover was from decades ago. I felt shaky. I walked onto the stage and the music grew louder. I could almost feel someone watching me from the rows of seats. The dust on the stage stirred at my feet. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stood in the spotlight and started speaking the lines from memory. As I spoke, I heard footsteps circling backstage. I didn't stop. The music kept playing. It was slow and scratchy. I reached the climax of the scene, the part where my character pleads for another chance. My voice trembled, but I gave it everything. As soon as I finished, the music cut off. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard. My chest rose and fell with each breath. I listened. Then I heard a single pair of hands clap from somewhere in the wings. I swallowed. My lips felt dry. A voice spoke out low and firm. It said again. I froze. That was the first time I heard something so clear I couldn't see who spoke. The voice was calm but insistent. I answered with a shaky, "Who are you?" No response. I waited. My hands shaking at my sides, I felt something pass behind me. My shoulders tightened and I swung around. There was nothing. The stage lights went out, leaving me in near darkness, except for a faint glow from a small lamp near the backstage entrance. I hurried over and flipped the main switch, but nothing happened. My breath quickened and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I fumbled around trying to find a flashlight. Then the lights flickered back on by themselves. The stage was empty. The program was gone from the table. I left the theater in a hurry that evening. I sat in my car for a while trying to calm down. My hands were sweating so much that I had trouble gripping the steering wheel. I wanted to leave that job, but the idea of walking away didn't sit right with me. I felt like I had an obligation to finish what I started. I also felt that the presence in the theater wanted me to keep going. It was like we were locked in some strange rehearsal together. The next morning, I decided I would go back and finish the play. I arrived early and stepped onto the stage. I went through each act line by line, gesture by gesture. I heard occasional sounds, a chair creaking in the darkness, the soft tread of footsteps behind the backdrops, and sometimes that faint music. I kept at it. My voice got stronger. My nerves were still there, but I pushed through by the final act. I felt a strange energy in the room. The floor felt warmer under my feet and the lights looked brighter. I delivered my last lines with my eyes on the empty seats. The tension in my chest built up, and when I reached the final word, a wave of relief spread through me. I could feel my shoulders relax. Then I heard applause. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. It lasted a few seconds, coming from all around me like a small group of people clapping from different corners of the auditorium. I didn't see anyone. There were no people in the seats, no shapes in the balconies, but the applause echoed briefly, then faded. I stood there breathing fast. My skin felt cold. I said, "Thank you," out loud. My voice sounded raw, then the lights. Wood had small splinters around the scratches, and they felt relatively new. I felt uneasy, but I tried to focus on my work. I grabbed my field bag and decided to spend the day exploring the nearby area looking for the species I came here to find the day itself. Went normally. I walked through dense areas, noted bird calls, took pictures of strange fungi, and even found some small insects that looked promising. I collected a few specimens in sealed containers, labeled them, and marked the coordinates in my notebook. I didn't hear or see anything unusual during the day. By late afternoon, I headed back to the cabin. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, but I also felt stubborn. I had come a long way, and I didn't want to lose a night's rest trying to trek out in the dark. Besides, I kept telling myself that maybe the noises were just animals being curious. I told myself I could handle it. I reached the clearing again. The cabin looked the same, except the door was open. A crack. I know I had closed it that morning. My gut tightened, but I forced myself to check inside. My flashlight illuminated the interior, and nothing seemed missing or moved. My sleeping bag and backpack were where I left them. The only difference was the door. I shrugged it off as a loose hinge that let the door swing open before nightfall. I decided to secure the place more thoroughly. I tied a rope across the door and hammered in a small makeshift hook so it couldn't swing open by itself. I also placed a few empty tin cans near the windows, so if something tried to climb in, I'd hear the cans fall. This time I stayed awake later, writing notes and reviewing the day's findings. I ate another quick meal, then decided to read a bit from a field guide on local bird species. I kept the lantern on a low flame. Around midnight, I heard scratching on the wall again. At first, I froze, staring at the spot where the sound came from. It moved slowly along the exterior as if something was dragging a stick or a claw across the wood. I sat there, gripping my flashlight. My throat felt tight and my chest was tense. I heard a soft thump near the window. The tin cans rattled but didn't fall. I stood up, stepped over to the window, and lifted the edge of the tarp. I hung there. The forest was dark, and my flashlight only illuminated a patch of trunks and brush. I didn't see a shape or figure. Then I heard a single knock on the wall close to where I stood. It was louder than the scratching, and it made me jump. My heart pounded, and I felt my fingers trembling around the flashlight. It sounded like a hand striking the wood. I whispered to myself to stay calm. I considered yelling, but I stopped. I was afraid it might provoke something instead. I cleared my throat, breathed deeply, and moved toward the door. I unhooked the rope carefully. Not wanting to make noise, my plan was to see if something was out there and maybe scare it off by shining my light directly on it. I swung the door open fast and aimed the beam in every direction. I saw trees, shrubs, the old path leading into the woods, but nothing else. The clearing felt still. The air tasted cool and smelled slightly of moist earth. My breath sounded too loud in my own ears. I stepped outside, walked around the cabin, shining the flashlight over the walls. I saw fresh scratch marks near a window similar to the ones I found that morning, but no footprints or fur. I began to wonder if it was some type of primate or a large bird. This region wasn't known for anything that large, though. My chest tightened as I thought about spending another night like this. I looked at the tree line, half expecting something to peek out. The tension in my shoulders felt almost painful, but I forced myself to stay steady. After circling the cabin, I went back inside and locked the door again. I noticed my hands shaking. I tried to calm myself by organizing my specimens and checking my camera. Every small noise outside made me flinch. Eventually, fatigue took over. I turned down the lantern and lay on my cot, keeping the flashlight in my grip. I must have slipped into a restless sleep because I felt that same presence from before. I heard tapping on the walls, but this time it sounded closer. My dreams were fragmented images of the forest floor shifting and branches twisting. I woke in a panic when I thought I heard the door opening, but it was still secured. My heart hammered and my t-shirt stuck to my skin with sweat. The rest of the night passed in that state, half awake, half asleep, jumping at each rustle. Morning came as a relief again. I wasted no time. I packed my gear, rolled up my sleeping bag, and stuffed everything in my backpack. I walked outside and looked at the walls. One last time, more scratches, more odd marks. I saw something that looked like a small handprint, but it was smeared or incomplete. I felt a wave of unease roll through me. I had no desire to spend another night there. I decided I'd collect my last samples that day and then hike out by sunset. I grabbed my notebook, stuffed it. Answer, they all seemed confused and lost. It was like they were trapped in the same loop. There was one presence that stayed longer than usual. It entered my cab near a lonely stretch of road by the railroad tracks. I felt the usual drop in the back seat. Then I heard a slow, shallow breathing followed by a deep sigh. I waited a moment before speaking. My voice trembled. "Can you hear me?" The presence answered, "Yes." Its voice was raspy, like it hadn't spoken in a long time. I tried to breathe through my nose to calm myself. I asked, "What do you want tonight?" It paused. I heard another sigh. "I want to feel normal," it said. My arms tensed. My chest felt heavy. "What do you mean by normal?" I said. The presence let out another sigh. "I don't remember how things felt. I need to keep moving. I can't stop." I heard rustling as if it was shifting closer to my seat. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I asked, "Where do you want me to take you?" The presence replied, "Anywhere. Just keep driving." So I drove. I passed the empty factories. I passed silent gas stations with flickering lights. My mind raced with questions, but I pushed them aside. I listened to the presence's breathing and tried not to panic. After about 10 minutes, the presence spoke again. "I used to have a place. It said there was a corner near a window. It smelled like coffee. The air was warm. I remember music in the background. Ground, its voice sounded so distant, like it was forcing out the words through a blocked passage. I wanted to ask more, but the presence fell silent. A few minutes later, the seat rose. The invisible passenger was gone. I heard a faint pop like air leaving a balloon. Then I realized my own breath was shaky and my mouth felt dry. I pulled over at a convenience store to catch my breath. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the empty back seat. It looked normal. Nothing was out of place. My arms were covered in goosebumps, and I noticed my hands had sweat on them. Night after night, the pattern continued. Sometimes I had 3 or 4 rides with invisible passengers in a single shift. Other times I went 2 or 3 nights without one, but they always came back. They were all restless and uncertain. They all seemed desperate for something they couldn't define. I tried adjusting my routes, picking up real passengers in busier parts of town, but eventually I'd have to drive through a quiet stretch. That was when it happened. That was when the seat dipped, and I heard breathing or whispers a few times. I thought I saw a faint glow in the corner of my eye. It never lasted long. I tried to keep calm, but my body reacted every time my muscles clenched, and I got a metallic taste in my mouth. I had trouble sleeping during the day because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. One evening around 3 in the morning, I was driving through an older neighborhood with narrow streets. The streetlights were spaced far apart. The houses all seemed dark. I cruised along, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. My heart was pounding. Even though I didn't see anything, then I heard a voice behind me, loud enough to make me jump. It said, "Please turn right." I jerked the wheel slightly before I caught myself. My pulse skyrocketed. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" I asked. The voice didn't respond. It just repeated, "Please turn right." So I turned right onto another dark street with tall hedges on both sides. The passenger whispered again, "Go straight." I drove slowly and I could barely see anything ahead. My headlights lit up old asphalt and patches of weeds. The voice said, "Stop here." I hit the brakes. The engine hummed. My hands shook. I could hear my own breathing. The seat behind me sank a little more, like someone was leaning forward. Then I felt a soft touch on my shoulder. It was light and cold. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. I heard the voice again, very close to my ear. "I don't see it here." It said there was a slight tremor in its tone, like sadness or frustration. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight. "What are you looking for?" I managed to say. The voice paused. I heard faint breathing. Then it whispered, "I don't know." I sat frozen. My eyes locked on the empty street ahead. The seat behind me shifted and the presence vanished. The cold touch disappeared from my shoulder. My body felt stiff and a wave of nausea hit me. I took a few moments to compose myself before driving away. At times, the invisible passenger shared small details from whatever existence they remembered. A few of them mentioned a house with blue walls or a living room with an old sofa. One talked about climbing stairs and feeling wind on a balcony. Another mentioned a favorite scarf. They never explained why they were in my cab. They didn't talk about family or friends or any real event. They just seemed stuck in their search. I could hear the desperation in their voices. It made my skin crawl, but I also felt a strange sympathy for them. They sounded lost sometimes. I tried to ignore them. I'd keep my hands on the wheel and focus on traffic lights or speed limits, but it never worked. The presence behind me always made itself known through a sudden whisper or a change in temperature. My heart would race and my thoughts would spin. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but that prickling sensation on the back of my neck never went away. One night I turned up the AC full blast, hoping the noise would drown out any whispering that just seemed to make them speak louder. Another time I tried playing loud music. The passenger in the back seat started humming along, even though I didn't see any shape there. My skin prickled at that one. The tune was off key and I could hear it behind the song on the radio. Eventually I gave up trying to block them out. There was one occasion when I pulled into a gas station to get a coffee. I parked near one of the pumps and left the engine running. As I reached for the door handle, I felt a sudden cold blast from the back seat. I froze. I heard a rough voice that said, "Don't leave me alone." I yanked my hand away from the handle. The voice repeated itself, sounding panicked. This time my chest felt like it was tightening and I realized I was holding my breath. "I'm just getting coffee," I said, feeling foolish for talking to an empty seat. The voice repeated, "Don't leave me alone." It sounded trapped, like it was caught in some loop. I felt sorry for it, but I also felt my stomach twist T in knots. I stayed in the car. I waited for a minute or two, but the presence didn't speak again. Then the seat felt normal and the air changed. I got out quickly, looking around in case someone was watching me talk to myself. Nobody was there. The station was nearly empty. My legs felt wobbly as I walked inside and poured coffee into a foam cup. My hand shook and I spilled some coffee on the counter. The clerk gave me a strange look, but I just wiped it up and paid that night. I drove home at dawn. The sky turned gray and I could see the normal world waking up. It always felt jarring. I parked my car in my building's lot and sat there. The street was quiet. I was exhausted, and my mind buzzed with all the voices I'd heard over the past few weeks. My body felt stiff and wired at the same time. I stared at the back seat, part of me, expected to see a faint outline or hear a whisper. It stayed silent. Eventually, I climbed out and locked the doors. I felt relieved to be away from the cab every time I get in the driver's seat at night. I brace myself. My mouth goes dry and my palms sweat. I wonder which passenger will show up. Will it be the one who breathes hard and mutters about losing something under a couch, or the one who asks me to stop in random spots for no reason, or maybe a new one with a different voice and a different secret? I don't know why they come to me. Sometimes I think they see me as a guide, but I'm just a guy trying to make a living. I can't help them, and they never explain their situation in detail. They all repeat the same pattern, searching for something. Not sure what stuck in confusion, a few nights ago I decided to ask direct questions. "Why do you come to my taxi?" I said to a presence that had just settled in the back seat. It was silent for a moment, then it spoke in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. "I see a light," it said. I frowned. "What light?" I asked. It just repeated a light, then grew quiet. I kept driving and the presence faded away. After about 5 minutes, it didn't clarify anything, but the mention of a light made me wonder if there was something about me or my cab that drew them in. That line of thought made me uneasy, so I tried to push it out of my head. The weird thing is that none of these passengers never harmed me. They left me shaken but not hurt. They just seemed desperate. They were stuck in some loop, repeating their searches and their confusion. I thought about calling a paranormal investigator or maybe a priest, but I'm not the religious type. Also, I couldn't prove any of this. I didn't have a camera that showed them any recording. I just picked up static or faint wind sounds, so I keep driving. I keep picking up my real fares, then in between I pick up these invisible fares that come out of nowhere. I wonder if one day I'll finally learn what they're missing. But so far they never find what they want tonight. I'm sitting in my cab near the airport waiting for a call. The radio is off. I'm listening to the rumble of jets in the distance. My chest is tight, my eyes are tired, and my stomach aches from too much coffee. I'm still looking in the rearview mirror every minute or so. The seat is EMP right now, but I know that could change at any moment. I feel a slight shift in the air and I hold my breath. I wait. Nothing happens. I exhale. This is my life now. I drive my taxi through the darkness, picking up real passengers and invisible ones. The invisible ones climb in silently, whisper their half-remembered stories, and leave with no warning. They're stuck searching, and I'm stuck listening. I can't see them, but I know they're there. That's the only truth I have. I start the engine and pull onto the street. It's another night on the job, and I can't stop wondering if the next turn will bring another drop in the back seat, another voice, another round of questions that never have an answer. I arrived at the old mansion on a Monday afternoon. The caretaker led me through a narrow hallway and unlocked a set of heavy double doors. He explained that my job was simple: catalog the books in the neglected library and leave everything in good order. He gave me the keys, wished me luck, and disappeared into another room. I stood at the threshold and felt my stomach tighten. The place smelled of dust, and stale air stacks of books leaned against wooden shelves. The windows were covered with thick drapes, and the only light came from old lamps that cast weak orange circles across the floor. I set my bag on a small desk near the entrance. There was a noticeable temperature drop in the library. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I rubbed my arms. I checked the nearby radiator, but it was cold and silent. I told myself it was just a draft in an old building. I turned on a few table lamps and took a quick look around the shelves stretched from one end of the room to the other with small aisles in between. Many books looked ancient, their bindings cracked or covered in dust. Some had titles in languages I didn't recognize. Others had no titles at all. I started my first round that night taking notes with a pencil and a notepad. I wanted to create a quick inventory of what I was dealing with before starting any detailed catalog. As I walked between the shelves, I heard a slight rustling sound behind me. I turned quickly, but I didn't see anything. My muscles felt tense. I told myself it was my imagination. I continued writing down what I saw: old encyclopedias, journals, some thick volumes on local history, a few on obscure topics. The air felt still. There was no wind. The only noise was the faint scratching of my pencil against paper. After about an hour, I headed back to the desk and placed my notes in a neat stack. I noticed that one of the tall shelves near the far wall had a slight tilt, like it was leaning forward. I made a mental note to check it later. My eyes burned a little from the low light, so I decided to bring a stronger flashlight. The next day, the caretaker had given me free rein to work at any hour, but I felt more comfortable working at night. For some reason, it seemed quieter, and I liked the idea of focusing on my task without interruptions. That first night, nothing obvious happened aside from a few odd noises. I went home with a mild headache. I thought it might be the dust or the strain on my eyes. I returned the next night with a thermos of coffee, a larger flashlight, and a small duster to clear off the worst of the dirt. Once again, I unlocked the library doors and stepped inside. The lamps were off, so I turned on the ones near the entrance. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. The silence was overwhelming and I realized I was holding my breath. I walked to the same desk and noticed something out of place. A small piece of paper lay on top of my notes. My notes were exactly as I had left them. Except for the addition of this paper, it had a few strange symbols scrolled on it. They didn't look like proper letters, more like quick scratches with a pen. I held it up to the light, but I couldn't make sense of it. I felt a slight tremor in my hands. I placed the paper in my bag, thinking maybe the caretaker had left me a message or something. But why would he leave random symbols? I tried to shrug it off and continued my catalog work. I dusted the spines of a few large volumes and opened one. At random, it contained diagrams of unfamiliar shapes, and the text was in a language I didn't read. The pages felt thick and rough, like handmade parchment. There were no publishing details, no author names. I wrote down its location and closed it. I heard a quiet thump to my left. My heartbeat sped up and I moved the flashlight beam in that direction. I saw a hardcover book lying on the floor. It must have fallen from the shelf. I walked over, picked it up, and placed it back on the shelf. The label on the spine was faded, so I couldn't read the title. I kept working for a few more hours. Every so often I paused and listened. The silence felt heavier than before. My ears started picking up every tiny sound. My own breathing, the gentle hum from the lamp, the creak of the floorboards. I felt a slight pressure at my temples. When I finished that night, I locked up and went home. On the walk back, I kept replaying the moment I found the paper. I couldn't explain it, and it made me uneasy. On the third night, I decided to be more systematic. I planned to finish the inventory of the main shelves. Then I'd check the smaller alcove in the back corner of the library. When I arrived, I immediately looked at my desk. My notes were there, but now 2 more scraps of paper sat on top of them. Both had similar odd markings. One page had a series of random letters. That seemed scrambled. The other had circles and lines that reminded me of a rough map. I touched them, expecting them to feel wet or smudged, but they were dry. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I walked around the library calling out, "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed, no answer. I checked the entrance to see if there were any fresh footprints on the dusty floor, but I couldn't see anything. I tried to keep working, but my mind was all over the place. I felt jumpy. My hand shook every time I heard a tiny noise. I kept glancing at the aisle behind me. Sure, I'd see someone watching, but there was never anyone there. Later that night, I noticed the tall, tilted shelf had shifted, more like it was about to tip over. I pushed against it gently, but it was stable enough. The wood felt rough under my fingers, and I could see deep scratches on the side. It looked like something had dragged sharp edges across it. I felt a lump in my throat when I saw those marks. My chest felt tight, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I stayed longer than usual that evening, trying to push through my nerves. I told myself it was just an old building, maybe with some hidden draft or unsteady foundation. Around midnight, I started hearing a quiet scraping sound. I aimed my flashlight around the aisles. Nothing moved. I followed the sound to an old wooden table in the back. The table was empty except for a thick layer of dust. The noise stopped when I got close. My heart thumped in my chest and a light sweat broke out on my forehead. I realized my eyes were sore and my neck felt stiff. I closed up for the night, locked the doors, and hurried away from the mansion. My shoulders felt tense. The whole drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, though I didn't see anything unusual. I had trouble sleeping and woke up several times. My mind kept returning to those scraps of paper. On the 4th night, I arrived determined to figure out what was happening. I brought a tape recorder in case I picked up any strange sounds. I also brought a small camera. I wasn't sure if it was allowed, but I figured no one would care. I unlocked the library doors and felt a chill run across my face. The air felt colder than usual. I placed the recorder on the main desk and pressed record. Then I walked around with the camera, taking photos of the shelves and tables. My hands were unsteady, so some shots came out blurry while I took photos. I heard a rustle near the far corner. I froze listening. It sounded like pages turning. I walked toward the sound, holding the camera up. There was a single lamp lit in that corner, casting shadows on the walls. On a small reading stand, I saw a book lying open. Its pages were blank, which seemed odd. I flipped the pages, but they were all empty. Then I heard a whisper. I couldn't tell where it came from. It was like the air itself carried a faint hiss. My spine tingled and I broke out in goosebumps. I stood there not sure what to do. My heart pounded in my ears. I backed away, nearly dropping the camera when I returned to the desk. The tape recorder had stopped. I checked it, but it was still powered on. The tape was ejected. That didn't make sense because I had just pressed record. I rewound it to see if it captured anything. I heard my own footsteps at the start, then a soft crackle, then silence. Suddenly there was a faint scratching noise followed by a short whisper. I couldn't make out words. It might have been a breath. I felt a chill wash over me. I pressed stop and looked around the room. My mind raced. I couldn't explain it. I tried to calm down by focusing on the catalog work. My mouth felt dry and I kept swallowing to clear my throat. I moved to the next row of shelves, writing down titles and checking condition. When I reached the last book on the row, it refused to slide out. It was stuck. I tugged at it a bit harder and the entire shelf rattled. I stopped immediately, afraid the whole thing would collapse. Then I noticed that the back of the shelf had a small latch. It was hidden behind a stack of dusty encyclopedias. I pulled the encyclopedias aside and flicked the latch. A panel at the back of the shelf clicked open. I shined my flashlight inside. There was a narrow passage. The space looked cramped. I hesitated for a moment, then squeezed through. The passage smelled of mold. The walls had old bricks damp too. The touch, I inched forward until I found a small chamber with a low ceiling. My head almost touched it. There was a single wooden box resting on a stone ledge. The box was covered in dust and had a lock, but the lock was broken. My hands were slick with sweat. I wiped them on my pants and lifted the lid inside. There were several sheets of parchment covered in the same weird symbols I had seen on those scraps of paper. Some had notes and pencil, like someone tried to translate them. There were partial words in English, but nothing made sense. Dr. Gate Beyond My Pulse hammered in my ears. I picked up the sheets and noticed a small leather-bound booklet beneath them. It had no title. I opened it and saw handwritten entries. The penmanship was uneven and the ink had bled through the thin pages. In places it was all about rites, invocations, and references to dark secrets. The words were blunt descriptions of some hidden knowledge. I felt a twisting sensation in my gut as I flipped through. My breathing became shallow. My head felt light and my skin tingled with anxiety. I slid everything back into the box and closed the lid. My mind buzzed with questions. Was this the forbidden knowledge? The caretaker mentioned in passing. I remembered him telling me that the mansion had a long, complicated history and that some things were better left untouched. I felt a surge of panic and an odd curiosity. Part of me wanted to take the box and study everything in a bright open room. Another part of me wanted to shove it all back and pretend I never saw it. My heart pounded and I felt sweat trickle down my back. I carried the box out of the passage, set it on a nearby table, and took a few photos with my camera. My hands were shaking and I didn't know if the photos would turn out. Then I heard movement near the end entrance to the library. It sounded like footsteps on the wooden floor. I turned off my flashlight and stood still. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I strained to hear anything else. The footsteps stopped. My heart throbbed in my chest and my muscles felt tight. I forced myself to move back toward the desk. When I reached it, I realized the light from the lamps had dimmed, like someone had turned down the power. My eyes struggled to adjust. I looked at my notes and they were in disarray. Some pages were scattered across the floor. My pencil was snapped in half on the desk. The tension in my neck was almost painful. My stomach felt cramped and I felt a wave of dizziness. I reached for a bottle of water in my bag and took a few gulps. My throat was raw and the water tasted metallic on my tongue. I looked around again, then spoke out loud in a shaky voice. "I'm just here to do my job. I'm leaving soon." I felt stupid talking to an empty room, but I had the sense that something heard me. The oppressive silence returned. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My legs felt weak and my hands twitched at my sides. I gathered my scattered notes, stuffing them into my bag without bothering to organize them. I grabbed the camera, the tape recorder, and the box from the hidden passage. I didn't want to leave it behind, although I had no idea what to do with it. I stepped toward the library doors and heard a distant scraping sound like nails dragging on wood. It made my skin crawl, and I picked up my pace. When I reached the doors, I fumbled with the keys for a moment. The doors were stuck. My pulse pounded in my temples, and I pulled hard. Finally, they gave way with a sudden jerk. I stepped out into the hallway and shut the doors behind me. My shoulders relaxed slightly, and I let out a long breath. I locked the doors and hurried toward the main entrance of the mansion. I didn't stop to check if the caretaker was around. I just wanted to get out. I reached my car, sat inside for a minute, and tried to settle my breathing. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, and my forehead was damp with sweat. My chest felt tight, and I kept thinking about those scraps of paper and the weird book. My mind was buzzing with confusion and a growing fear. I started the engine, drove away, and didn't look back until I was several blocks from the property. Even then, I felt as if something was behind me watching. I still have the box. I haven't told anyone about it yet. I haven't returned to the library. The caretaker called once to ask how the catalog was going, and I said I needed a break because I was feeling sick. He didn't push me. He just said to let him know when I was ready to continue. I think he knows something, but he won't say. I keep the box locked in my closet at home. Sometimes I hear faint scratching from inside, like the pages are shifting around on their own. I can't explain it, but it makes my pulse jump every time. That's the truth of what happened in that old library. I don't know if I'll finish the job. I haven't found a logical explanation for the notes, the rearranged books, or the presence I sensed every night. The forbidden knowledge in that hidden passage scares me, but it also pulls at my curiosity. I keep telling myself I'll go back to finalize the catalog and hand over the files, but part of me worries that once I step into that library again, I'll never leave the same way I entered for now. I'm staying away. The memory of that silence still makes my heart race. I still remember the jolt I felt when I first heard the whispers coming from that dark corner of the abandoned factory. It was around 2 in the morning. My shift had started at midnight, and the place was always dead quiet. By that time, there was no wind that night, no passing cars, and no other people on the property. The only noise I ever heard was my own breathing, but that night there was something else. It caught me off guard, and the sound got inside my head before I could even process what it was. I work alone because this factory was shut down years ago. The company went bankrupt and all the workers disappeared from the place. My boss got the contract to watch over it just to keep vandals out and make sure nobody stole the remaining equipment. People around town always said there was something off about the property. I never believed any of that until I started my rounds there. I figured it was just old talk from folks who wanted a good story to share at the bar. But after that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remember standing in front of the main entrance checking if the lock was secure. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and lit up the rusty metal door. Everything seemed fine. Then I heard a soft murmur. It sounded like someone talking, but the words weren't clear. I froze for a second. I turned my head, trying to pick up the direction of the noise, but it vanished. As soon as I moved, I told myself it was my imagination. I had done the same routine hundreds of times without trouble. I went back to making my rounds, but a tight feeling settled in my stomach. I walked through the central aisle of the factory. The place was huge. Broken machines were scattered around, and the smell of old metal and damp concrete filled the air. My boots scraped against the floor, making small echoes in the open space. Normally, that echo comforts me because it's the only sign of life I have in there, but I noticed my footsteps sounded hollow, like something else was absorbing the noise. It was subtle, but it bothered me. I kept turning around to see if somebody was behind me when I got close to the far side of the building where an isolated storage galley stood. I heard faint whispers again. It came from the direction of that smaller warehouse that sits off to the side of the main structure. It's a building nobody uses, not even for storage. The place looks older than the rest of the factory. The walls are grimy and the doors are warped from years of neglect. I always found it odd that it was still there. Normally, they would have demolished a useless structure to save on property taxes or something like that. But for some reason, this old warehouse stayed. I tried to shrug off the noise, but curiosity got the better of me. My heart that in my chest as I walked over my flashlight. Caught a glimpse of something that looked like a faint shape slipping through the door. I stopped and stared. I had never seen anyone around the factory at that hour, and I've never noticed any sign of squatters. I felt a chill crawl up my neck, and I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. I moved closer, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. I raised it in front of me, not sure if I was about to confront a real person or something else. When I entered that small building, the air was different. It felt thick, like the atmosphere was pressing down on me. The light from my flashlight flickered a bit, which made me nervous. I changed the batteries before my shift, so there was no reason for it to act up. I forced myself to keep moving. I saw random debris on the floor, broken wood, scattered nails, and old metal scraps. The ceiling dripped in a few spots, creating a constant tap on the concrete. My boots felt heavier with each step, like I was dragging my feet through invisible resistance. I followed the corridor inside. That building, it was narrow, and the walls had stains that looked darker than simple mold. My flashlight caught a glimpse of strange markings on those walls. They were shapes carved into the concrete, rough and uneven. They didn't look like gang tags or typical graffiti. They reminded me of old symbols you might see in a history book, but I didn't know what they meant. My stomach twisted into a knot when I realized they formed a pattern leading toward the back of the warehouse. Suddenly, I heard another whisper this time. I was sure it came from directly in front of me. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, but in the same hush tone. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. My mouth went dry, and I tried to swallow, but it felt like my throat was constricted. I took a deep breath and forced myself to push forward. The last thing I wanted was to turn around and run, only to leave the door wide open for something to come out after me. I reached a large empty room near the end of the corridor. The floor was covered in dust, and the ceiling had holes that let in small beams of moonlight. My flashlight began to flicker again, so I tapped it with my palm. The beam steadied for a moment, revealing a circle of old burnt candle stubs on the ground in the center of that circle. I saw a rough chalk drawing. It looked like more of those strange symbols they all connected in a spiral. My hand started shaking, so I gripped the flashlight tighter to keep it steady. The temperature felt much colder than the rest of the building, like I had stepped inside of fridges. I stood there. I noticed faint footprints in the dust around the circle. They looked recent, maybe a day or two old. The size was hard to determine, but they were definitely human. Footprints, or at least they appeared to be. My mind raced. Maybe some group broke in to do weird rituals. The thought alone made my skin crawl, but I told myself that was the logical explanation. People do strange things in abandoned places. I crouched down to get a closer look. I didn't touch anything, but I shone my flashlight on the drawings. The lines were shaky, like they were drawn by someone trembling or in a rush. The candle stubs were partially melted into the floor. Wax had formed uneven lumps around them. The smell in that space felt heavier, like stale incense mixed with rotting leaves. I heard another whisper, but it was closer this time, almost at my ear level. I spun around, shining the light at the corners of the room, but I saw nothing. My heart pounded and my breaths turned shallow. I felt a growing sense of panic. I had never encountered anything like this in my years as a security guard. Usually the worst I deal with is a trespassing teenager or someone trying to strip copper wiring to sell. This was different. I told myself to stay calm. I tried to rationalize it as some leftover materials from local thrill seekers, but I felt goosebumps on my arms that wouldn't go away. My mind kept jumping back to that whisper. It sounded too real to dismiss. I thought about calling my boss, but my cell phone had no signal inside. That part of the building, that wasn't unusual. The reception was always spotty in the factory. I decided to head back toward the entrance to see if I could call from outside, but as I started to leave, I heard a shuffle behind me. It sounded like feet scraping the floor. I spun around again, shining my flashlight light. Nothing was there. My nerves were on edge and my chest felt tight. I could barely think straight, I said out loud. If someone's here, you need to leave. My voice sounded shaky to my own ears, which made me even more uneasy. No one answered. The only sound was my heartbeat throbbing in my head. I backed out of that room slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the place. As I made my way into the corridor, I felt like something was watching me every few steps. I whipped around, expecting to see a figure behind me. I didn't see anyone, but the sense of being followed grew stronger. I could almost feel the heat of a stare on the back of my neck. My muscles tensed and a dull ache started in my shoulders from keeping them hunched up in defense. Once I got outside that small building, I stood there trying to catch my breath. My mouth felt dry and my lips were cracked. I looked around to see if there were any signs of movement, but the courtyard was empty. The main factory building loomed in the distance, dark and silent. I checked my phone. I had one bar of signal, so I tried to call my boss. But the call didn't go through. I sent him a short text saying I found signs of trespassing. The message struggled to send, then finally went through. He didn't respond right away. So I moved on. I forced myself to finish my round. The rest of the factory was the same as always, broken equipment, rust and darkness. But the entire time I felt this pressure on my chest. I couldn't shake the idea that something was in that isolated wee house, something that wasn't just a person messing around. Once I completed my sweep of the main building, I went back to the security office near the front gate. It's a small room with a desk, a chair, and a few old monitors hooked up to security cameras that cover most of the factory exterior. None of the cameras point to that isolated warehouse. Though the people who set up the system must not have cared about it, when I sat down, I realized I was sweating. The night was cool, so the sweat was from pure nerves. My throat felt tight, and I could still hear echoes of those whispers in my head. I tried to concentrate on the monitors. I looked for any sign of movement, but everything stayed quiet. I felt alone and exposed in that little security room. The walls are thin, and the door doesn't even lock properly. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting the door to swing open after about 20 minutes. My phone finally vibrated. My boss had texted back, telling me to note everything in the log and that he'd come by in the morning. I stared at the message, feeling frustrated. I wanted someone else to show up right then, but that wasn't going to happen. I was on my own until sunrise, so I got up, grabbed a bottle of water from the small fridge and tried to calm down. My nerves were still shot, but I didn't want to sit there doing nothing. I decided to go online on my phone for a moment. I typed the name of the old factory plus the word rituals, just to see if anything popped up. My signal was weak. But eventually some old news clippings showed up. Most were rumors, but a few mentioned that the land used to belong to a local group that practiced alt ceremonies there. It wasn't much detail. One article said the group was disbanded a long time ago. Another said the site had been linked to some strange activity before the factory was built. I scrolled through half-loaded images but didn't see anything definitive. The more I read, the more tense I felt. I realized it matched the weird symbols and the circle of candles I had found. It made me wonder if someone was trying to stir up whatever was left behind. My skin crawled at the thought of more people coming back to continue those rituals. I looked at the clock on my phone and saw that it was only a little after 3 in the morning. I had hours to go before my shift ended. I sat there tapping my foot on the ground, trying to decide if I should do another round. Before dawn, part of me wanted to stay in that security room until the sun came up, but a bigger part of me felt I needed to make sure nobody was still hiding in that warehouse. I didn't like the idea of being surprised, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped back outside. The wind had picked up a little rustling, some loose sheets of metal on the property. The rattling sound made me jump. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and headed back toward that smaller building. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I was pretty sure I had pulled it shut when I left. I stopped, my heart pounding in my ears. My palms felt clammy and my breathing turned shallow again. I wanted to turn around, but I forced myself to walk closer. I nudged the door with my foot, shining my flashlight inside. The corridor was empty, but the darkness felt like it was moving. My eyes kept playing tricks on me, making me think I saw silhouettes sliding along the walls. I took a few steps inside, my throat felt tight again, and each breath felt like a struggle. I called out, "This is security if you're here. Come out now." My voice echoed, but no one answered. I heard a dripping sound somewhere in the distance, probably water leaking. I walked in, feeling my knees tremble. My flashlight flickered again, which made my pulse. Spike, I shook it, and the light steadied. Then I followed the corridor back to that large room with the circle on the floor. The candle stubs were still there, but the footprints in the dust looked different. They seemed smudged, like someone had dragged their feet over them. I heard another soft whisper that echoed around the room. My stomach turned and I felt a wave of dizziness. I scanned the entire ire space with my flashlight, seeing only the walls and the floor. Nothing moved. My fingers were numb from clenching the flashlight too hard. I kept swallowing, trying to get some moisture in my throat, but my mouth stayed dry. I noticed a metal door at the far end of the room. It was partially open. I hadn't seen it before because it blended into the wall. I walked toward it, my boots scraped over the floor, stirring up dust. The door led to a small closet-sized space inside. I saw a stone slab leaning against the wall. It looked out of place, almost like a piece of old architecture. There were more symbols carved into it. I ran my fingers over the edges, feeling the rough texture. The whispers grew louder in my ears, even though I couldn't see anything else in that cramped area. My legs felt like they were about to give out, so I stepped back into the larger room. At that point, I couldn't stay there any longer. The fear felt too intense. My body was screaming at me to get out. I left the building, making sure to close the door behind me. I hurried across the property back to the security office. Once I got inside, I locked the door as best I could. Even though the lock was flimsy, I sank into the chair, my hands shaking. I watched the monitors and listened to every small sound outside, bracing myself for more whispers. But the rest of the night passed without any more disturbances. When dawn finally broke, I felt some relief. The sunlight eased the tightness in my chest. I stayed in the security office until my boss arrived. When he walked in, I told him about what I found: the warehouse, the candles, the symbols, and the whispers. He gave me a skeptical look, then said he'd call some people to check it out. I could see he wasn't entirely convinced, but he saw how shaken I was. He said he believed I found something. Though he wasn't sure what, I was just glad I made it through the night in one piece. I never forgot that feeling of standing in that cold, dark space, seeing those strange shapes on the walls. I still work as a guard, but I asked for a different location after that. I couldn't keep going back to the same spot. Hearing those voices at night, feeling the air press against my skin. I don't know what really happened there. Maybe it was just some local group pulling a weird prank, or maybe there's more to that old story about occult rituals on that land. Either way, I don't plan to find out, and that's the truth of what I went through, plain and simple. No decorations, no embellishments, just the raw account of the night that changed how I look at empty buildings. Forever. I still remember the quiet hum of the ventilation system on that first night when I realized something was wrong. I was standing in the middle of the empty lobby, my tie loose around my neck, looking at the elevator doors. The time was a little past midnight, and I felt a pressure in my chest that wasn't there before I didn't see anyone else. The security guard in the lobby had left for his usual rounds, and the cleaning staff had clocked out hours earlier. The fluorescent lights flickered every once in a while, and the place smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I pressed the elevator button without much thought, but as soon as the door slid open, I felt a rush of cold air. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stepped inside, and that was the beginning of everything I'm about to share. I'm an executive at a finance company. I usually work late because there's always a new project or a report to finalize. I don't have much of a social life. My routine is simple. I arrive around in the morning, deal with meetings all day, then stay after hours to finish things I can't get done. Otherwise, I'm used to being one of the last people in the building. The lights on most floors go off by 9 p.m. The only people who stay are a few it guys. Sometimes a project manager or a security guard who might be dozing at his desk. I never felt nervous about being alone there. The building is tall, the hallways are usually silent at night, and I'm used to it. That changed around a week ago. I had stayed until midnight finishing an analysis. For an upcoming client pitch, I packed up my laptop, slid some folders into my briefcase, then headed for the elevator. The hallway was dim, a single overhead light flickered in and out, and I felt a small twinge of anxiety, but I ignored it. I got to the elevator and I saw that all the floor indicators above the doors were dark except for the number 35, which was my floor. That made sense because I was calling it from the 35th. The doors opened and I stepped in. The interior smelled like old metal and something sour. I don't recall smelling that. Before I pressed the button for the lobby and the doors closed, the elevator jerked once and then started moving down. I checked my watch and thought about what I might grab to eat on my way home. It's the usual routine. Watch the small screen above the door as the floor numbers blink in descending order, but that night it stopped at floor 29. The display said 29, but the elevator didn't open. Instead, the lights inside flickered. I was alone in that small box waiting, feeling my pulse pick up. My breath got shallow. I pressed the door open button and nothing happened. I waited a few seconds looking at the control panel. The overhead light buzzed and flickered again and the elevator started moving down. I tried to shrug off the moment as a glitch in the system. When I got to the lobby, the doors opened. Normally everything looked the same, maybe a little darker than usual because half the lights were off. At that hour, I walked out and saw nobody around. The security desk was empty. A single lamp shone on the countertop, revealing a few logbooks and a half-eaten sandwich. I whispered a hello, expecting the guard to pop out from somewhere, but I heard nothing. I walked outside, got in my car, and drove home, trying not to overthink the elevator stalling at floor 29. I convinced myself it was a random malfunction. The next night, I was in the office again until late. The hours went by fast. I remember stepping into the elevator again around the same time. This time, the panel above the door showed random numbers flickering. It would switch from 15 to 22 to 34 in a strange loop. I thought it was broken, so I hesitated before stepping in when the doors opened. There was that cold rush again. My arms tingled and I felt a tiny drop of sweat trickle down my temple. I told myself it was nothing, so I got in. I pressed the button for the lobby and waited. The elevator started moving, but the display showed no numbers. It was blank. I felt my heart beating harder and I glanced around for a service phone inside the panel. I found the small door that usually hides the emergency phone and I opened it. There was nothing inside, just an empty slot. I stood there, the overhead light flickering. The elevator slowed, my stomach tightened. I tried to guess what floor it would open on. After a moment of silence, the door slid open. I looked out at a hallway I'd never seen. The sign on the wall said 28, but it didn't look like the 28th floor. The lighting was different, the walls had a strange texture, and the carpet felt thin and rough. I stepped out cautiously. The corridor was silent. The doors closed behind me before I could react. I heard a faint mechanical hum moving off into the distance. I turned around and pressed the call button on the wall, hoping the elevator would come back. The button lit up, but I didn't hear anything. I walked down the hallway, hearing the soft thud of my shoes on that carpet. There were doors. On each side, no signs, no nameplates. I tried a doorknob. It turned, but the door was locked from the inside. I tried another door. Same thing. I felt my pulse in my throat. The air smelled damp and stale. The overhead lights buzzed in a steady rhythm. At the end of the hallway, I heard a low clicking noise. It reminded me of someone drumming their nails on a table, but it was more rapid. I slowed my steps and tried to stay quiet. I approached the corner and I glimpsed a shape moving in the next corridor. It was bent over arms, two long legs that seemed to jerk at odd angles. My throat felt tight. I stepped back for a moment and pressed my spine against the wall. The clicking sound continued, and I realized it was coming from the creature. It was tapping its fingers on the walls as it walked. I could hear each tap like nails on wood. Even though the walls were some kind of painted drywall, I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. I forced myself to breathe through my nose, trying not to make a sound. My eyes started to water. I felt an urge to scream, but I clenched my jaw. Then I heard a faint hiss from behind me. I turned slowly and saw another shape near the far end of the hallway. This one was slightly shorter, with a wide face and a slack jaw. Its skin looked pale under the overhead lights, and it had small black eyes that blinked without any emotion. I stood there, caught between two hallways and two creatures that seemed to be exploring this floor. I spotted a door labeled stairs near me. I took a quick step toward it, turned the handle, and slipped inside. It was dark in the stairwell, but I could see the steps going up and down. I let the door close carefully and I listened. The tapping continued outside. Then it faded. The hiss from the other side also faded. My heart pounded. My breath came in shaky bursts. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with my sleeve. I was on some version of the 28th floor, but it wasn't the one I recognized. I didn't know how to get back. I tried the stairwell doors on a few different levels, but they were locked. The stairwell signs didn't look familiar. The numbers were either missing or scratched out. I went up 5 flights before I found another elevator door in the stairwell. It was a small metal door with an elevator access sign. I pulled it open and saw a service elevator inside. There was a panel, a single button, and an empty space where the emergency phone would normally be. I stepped in and pressed the button. The door closed. The lights flickered, and I felt a drop in my stomach as it descended. I tried to steady myself by leaning against the wall. I stared at the control panel. No numbers, just a single button. The elevator slowed and the doors slid open. I found myself in the lobby. At least it looked like the normal lobby, with the same reception desk, the same rows of plants near the entrance. A small light behind the desk illuminated a sign-in sheet. I took a breath and stepped out. I looked around. I saw the same half-eaten sandwich as the night before. I hurried out of the building. I got in my car and I drove away as fast as I could. I told myself I would never stay that late again, but work piled up, and within a few days I was back in my office past 9. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping to finish and leave by 10. At the latest, by the time I wrapped up, it was almost 11. My heart sank when I stepped into the hallway and saw the elevator doors at the end. They seemed to invite me with a strange glow from the overhead bulbs. I debated taking the stairs all the way down, but that felt stupid because my office was on the 35th floor. Still, I thought about it. In the end, I told myself I was being irrational, so I went to the elevator again. Again, the panel above the doors was normal this time, just the number 35 lit up waiting. The doors opened and the interior lights looked the same as they always did. I stepped in with my briefcase in hand. The inside smelled like stale air. I pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator jerked slightly and then started its descent. I kept my eyes on the panel above the door. It counted down 34, 33, 32, 31, 1. I relaxed a bit, then it stopped at 30 and the doors opened. The hallway outside was dark. There were no overhead lights, just the faint glow from the elevator shining a few feet into the corridor. I saw the shape of a table against the wall. I heard a faint rustling noise like cloth scraping against the floor. My stomach tightened. I pushed the door close button. The door shut, and the elevator continued down. When I reached the lobby, I ran out as soon as the doors parted. The security desk was empty again. The lighting was dim. I checked the front entrance. It was unlocked. I walked out, breathing hard, trying not to drop my briefcase outside. The air was cool, and I felt a sense of relief. I noticed a single guard near the parking lot entrance. He was leaning against the wall smoking. I walked over and asked why the lobby was empty. He just shrugged and said the main guard had stepped out. I didn't ask any more questions. I just left the next few nights. I had trouble sleeping. I kept imagining those strange hallways and the creatures tapping and hissing in the dark. I tried telling a coworker about it once, hinting that the elevator might be malfunctioning. She said building management had performed routine checks and everything was normal. I decided not to push the subject. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. A few days later, I stayed until midnight again. It was the only way to finish my work when I called the elevator. I stood to the side, gripping my briefcase so hard my knuckles turned white. The doors opened, I stepped in, I pressed the lobby button. The elevator went down as usual, stopping at a few floors when people pressed the button from the outside, but nobody got on. Each time the doors opened, the hallway was empty, no lights, no people, nothing. One floor had a loud buzzing sound, another had water dripping somewhere, my stomach hurt and sweat formed on my temples. I pressed the door close button each time, wanting to reach the lobby as fast as possible. When I finally got there, the guard was actually sitting at his station. I rushed past him and nodded. He gave me a strange look but didn't stop me. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands started to cramp. I felt a pounding in my head that lasted until I went to bed. Over the last few nights, the pattern has repeated. The elevator shows me floors I don't recognize. Sometimes it's a quick glimpse of an empty corridor with flickering lights. Sometimes I step out into a hallway that loops around in strange ways, leading me in circles until I find a service elevator. I see shapes that watch me. Some have wide eyes, some have no eyes. I hear tapping, hissing, and the sound of something heavy scraping across a floor. My body reacts with a cold sweat, rapid breathing, and shaky legs. I push my way back to an elevator. I press every button until something takes me down to the lobby again. Then I escape. I've tried using the stairs from my office to the lobby, but the doors lock from the inside. After the cleaning staff leaves, I've tried waiting for a coworker to ride the elevator with me, but I end up staying later than everyone else. Anyway, my boss demands these late reports. My fear hasn't gone away, but I keep convincing myself I can handle it. That maybe it's all in my head. I avoid direct confrontation with those creatures, but I see them at the edge of my vision. Their movements are jerky. Some have elongated arms or strange postures. They seem to guard the floors that appear only after midnight. I don't know if they want me to leave or if they want to keep me there. I only know that each time I see them, I feel a rush of panic. My throat gets tight and I can't speak. Sometimes I can't even swallow. Tonight I'm finishing my final report for the quarter. It's 11:50 p.m. The office is silent. I can hear the hum of a vacuum cleaner in the distance, but it fades away. After a minute, the cleaning staff is almost done. My hands are shaking as I type these last lines. I keep glancing at the clock, dreading the moment I have to press that elevator button again. I can't stay here until morning because the building locks down completely at 1 a.m. If I stay, I'll get stuck. If I go, I might end up on those strange floors again. I don't know how long I can keep doing this every night. The elevator seems to pull me deeper into those corridors every night. I see things that shouldn't exist. I feel the walls closing in. My breathing gets shallow and my heart races. My mind screams for me to stop working these hours. But I have a deadline and I can't quit my job. I have no proof of what I've seen and nobody would believe me anyway. Yet every time I press that button, I wonder if I'll come back right now. I'm shutting down my computer. I'm putting my files in my briefcase. My shirt is damp under the arms. My pulse is racing. I can't ignore the reality of this anymore. I have to leave. The elevator is waiting, and I need to hope it takes me where I want to go. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just know that once the clock passes midnight, the building becomes something else, and I'm the one who's been foolish enough to explore it. I'm heading there now. Listening to the echo of my footsteps in the hallway, my throat is tight and my skin feels cold. The elevator doors are in front of me, closed and silent. I reach out to press the button and my finger trembles. I feel that wave of dread washing over me again. It's time to see if I can make it back. I want to start by saying this. I never asked for a transfer to that lighthouse. I had no idea what I was getting into. When I got on the boat that morning, the wind smelled like salt and decay, and the trip lasted longer than I expected. The boat's engine coughed the entire way, and the pilot barely said a word. He just pointed off to the distance. Whenever I asked about the island when we finally arrived, all I saw was a narrow beach, a rocky slope, and tried to convince myself I'd just seen some natural phenomenon. Maybe it was a patch of bioluminescent algae. Maybe the footprints were old. I went through every possibility in my head, but none of them felt right. When darkness fell again, I made sure all the doors were locked. I turned on the lighthouse beam, then stayed up in the lantern room watching around. 2 in the morning, I saw it again from the vantage point. Up top, I noticed the glow start just beyond the breakers. It drifted toward the beach like a slow, steady light. My throat went dry. I hurried down the steps, stumbling a bit in my rush. This time, I grabbed the old binoculars hanging on a hook near the door. I shut the door behind me and jogged toward the edge of the cliff that overlooked the beach. When I raised the binoculars, I saw 3 figures. They moved in a line, heads bent forward. Walking slowly through the surf water, pulled around their ankles, and they left a trail of footprints behind a pale glow spread around them like an aura. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. They wore what looked like dark clothing drenched from the ocean. I couldn't see their faces. Their steps were synchronized like they were marching. I watched as they moved onto the sand and continued toward the lighthouse. My hands trembled so much that the binoculars shook. I lowered them and took a step back. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to run, but my feet stayed planted. I decided to go down to the beach. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. Maybe I just needed to see them up close. I scrambled down a narrow path, nearly slipping on the wet rock. The sea breeze pressed against me and the flashlight beam trembled in my grip. As I got closer, I saw the glow again. It was stronger now, bathing the figures in that same greenish-white light. It made the wet sand glisten. I called out, "Hello." My voice came out shaky. They didn't reply. They kept walking. I moved the flashlight beam onto them and caught a glimpse of wet arms and torsos. No face showed. It felt like I was looking at shadows. My heart pounded so loud it hurt. I took another step and the beam flickered. The flashlight made a buzzing sound, then it cut out. Darkness surrounded me and I froze. I still saw the glow in front of me, but my flashlight was dead. I heard a faint hissing noise, almost like static. My ears started to ring. I stepped backward and my boots sank into the sand. I struggled for balance. My pulse was racing. I tried to turn away, but I felt compelled to look. The figures passed by me, not even touching me up close. I noticed the air got colder. I heard them breathing, but it sounded wet and uneven. I wanted to speak, but my mouth was too dry. I just stood there staring. When I looked back, I saw them moving toward the lighthouse. The glow moved with them, lighting up the base of the tower. I couldn't move right away. My legs felt weak. After a few seconds, I forced myself to follow as I neared the foot of the tower. My flashlight flickered back on for half a second, then died again. The only light was that greenish glow. I saw their footprints pressed into the sand, going right up to the lighthouse door. Then, right before my eyes, the glow dimmed and the figures faded into the darkness. They vanished like they were never there. My heart thundered. I was sweating, and my stomach felt like I might vomit. I grabbed the doorknob, found it locked, and rushed inside. I stayed awake until sunrise, pacing around the small living area. I avoided the windows. My radio wouldn't pick up anything but static. It felt like my mind was reeling when morning arrived. I went outside to look for tracks. This time I saw footprints around the door. I could see droplets of water on the stone walkway. I followed the tracks around the corner and they stopped against the old stone wall. There was no path leading away from there. I reached out and touched the stone. It felt damp. I looked around for any other sign but found nothing over the next few days. I tried to stay calm. I wrote down everything in a separate notebook. I detailed the time, the weather, how many figures I saw, their direction, and the color of the light during the day. I checked every inch of the island. The place was small, just a ring of jagged rocks around the beach and the tower. I found a small cove on the far side, but there were no signs of boats or hidden huts. The supply boat came once, and I wanted to ask the pilot about the strange lights, but he just threw the crates on the sand, said he was behind schedule, and left. I felt like a fool standing there, not sure how to bring up something so bizarre. The figures kept coming. Some nights there were 2, some nights 3 or 4. They always appeared in that drifting glow somewhere beyond the breakers, then walked onto the sand past the lighthouse and vanished. Before dawn, sometimes I stayed locked inside and just listened. I heard soft footsteps outside, a faint sloshing of water and that distant hissing static sound. My chest would tighten, my arms would prickle with goosebumps. I kept a flashlight handy, but it often flickered and lost power whenever the glow got near. I tried using extra batteries. I tried using the backup lamp from the supply locker. The effect was always the same. My technology seemed to fail when those figures were around. I started feeling physically exhausted. My appetite disappeared. I could feel tension in my shoulders all day. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I'd doze off sometimes, then jerk awake, worried I'd hear something at the door. One night I felt bold enough to try taking photos. I found an old camera stashed in a drawer, a cheap digital one. The memory card was small, but it had some space left. I waited in the lantern room for the glow to appear, then rushed down to the shore. I snapped photos in quick succession, hoping one would come out. I saw the flash reflect off that eerie light, but the camera froze. It wouldn't let me view the image. Images the next day, I checked the card and every shot looked corrupted, just static and streaks that sent a chill through my bones. I tried every rational explanation I could imagine. I wondered if it was some kind of trick. Maybe smugglers with special gear, but I never found any contraband or hidden stash. I wondered if it was a weird reflection of the Lias beam, but the color was wrong, and the figures left footprints behind. One night I climbed onto the rocky cliff to watch from above. I witnessed the same process, a glow in the wave shapes walking onto the shore, heading for the tower, then dissolving into darkness. My heart pounded so hard I had to crouch down and catch my breath. I felt shaky, like my body couldn't handle the adrenaline anymore. After a couple of weeks, my eyes were sunken and my hands shook during the day. Every time I tried to call for help on the radio, it fizzled and went silent. The supply boat didn't show up on schedule. I felt trapped. The nights seemed longer. I started counting the hours until sunrise, but time dragged. Each evening, I'd sit in the kitchen with the lantern lit, chewing on stale crackers just to keep my jaws moving. My stomach churned with anxiety. It felt like the place was wearing me down bit by bit. I forced myself to keep a routine in the morning. I'd eat something and then do maintenance tasks. I'd check the fuel for the generator, see if the light worked, and make notes in the official lighthouse log. I tried to ignore the footprints I would sometimes find near the door. They were always wet, often large and deep. I would clean them up and then stand there feeling my pulse racing. The sense of being watched never went away. Even in broad daylight, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder. Expecting to see someone standing behind me one night, I decided I'd try to confront them. I was tired of cowering indoors. I prepared a strong flashlight, wrapped a spare battery pack around my waist, and grabbed a wooden club I found in the shed. Around 1 a.m, I spotted the glow. I marched down to the beach. Adrenaline pumping through my veins, the glow bobbed on the water's surface. Then I saw 4 figures emerge. They moved slowly toward me, leaving trails in the wet sand. I raised the flashlight and it died instantly. My wooden club felt slippery in my hand. I took a step forward, but my knees trembled. I tried to shout. Stop, my voice cracked. They came close, maybe 10 feet away. I heard them breathing, that wet rasping. The glow hurt my eyes and the hair on my arms stood on end. I felt a deep chill in my limbs. My body refused to move, like I was stuck in that moment. Then the glow started to fade. The air felt thicker. My chest tightened and I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance before I could steady myself. They were gone. One moment I saw them reaching the rocks near the lighthouse, and the next, nothing. No footprints, no glow, no sound. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. My breath came in short gasps. I realized I couldn't do anything to stop them. I couldn't touch them or photograph them. I couldn't even speak to them. They just appeared, walked past, and vanished each time they left footprints or wet patches, as proof that something physical was there, but they never stayed until dawn. They never tried to break in. They never showed hostility, but their presence made my skin crawl by the end of my stay. I was a mess. I slept only during the daytime for a couple of hours. Every night I'd see that glow in those figures. My mouth went dry every time my hands trembled from fear, my heart pounded so hard I worried it would give out, but they never harmed me. They just marched along the beach up to the tower and vanished. Eventually, the relief boat came one morning and I didn't hesitate. I stuffed my things in a duffel bag, handed over the lighthouse keys, and left the island without saying much on the ride back. I stared at the gray water and tried not to think about those footprints or the glow on the waves. Even now, when I recall it, I feel my chest tighten and my stomach twist. I just know what I saw, and it still keeps me awake some nights. I can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to. I just hope I never see that glowing light again. I walked into that building on a rainy Tuesday morning expecting nothing unusual. I had my tool bag in one hand and a folded work order in the other. I was tired, but I felt confident I could handle another routine plumbing job. When I stepped inside, I smelled old carpet and wet plaster. The manager handed me a few keys and said there were leaks in the basement. He was friendly enough, but he spoke fast and his eyes dark around like he didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just nodded, took the keys, and headed for the basement door. I remember thinking that the lights in the hallway flickered too often. I assumed it was a bad electrical circuit. I had no idea what waited for me in the depths below. My name is Gary. I'm a plumber, and I've been working in this field for almost 10 years. I've seen my share of flooded basements, busted pipes, and suspicious leaks. I can usually tell when water damage hides something worse, but that day I missed all the early signs that this building was different. Maybe I was too focused on finishing the job quickly. Maybe I was just tired from the day before. Either way, I pushed open the basement door and started down the concrete steps, humming a quiet tune to keep myself company. The basement smelled stale and damp. I saw water stains on the walls, forming dark rings that spread across the exposed concrete. The overhead bulbs buzzed. Their light was weak, and I noticed a few flickering off and on. The manager had told me to find the main valve in the back room. He said the pipes there had been making strange noises and leaking around the joints. I walked through a narrow corridor, stepping over puddles. My boots made splashing sounds that echoed. The sound bothered me a bit because it felt too loud. In that cramped space, I finally reached the back room. It looked like a standard maintenance area. There were shelves full of old tools, boxes of spare parts, and a strong smell of metal and grease. The pipes on the ceiling were covered in rust, and some of them dripped water onto the floor. I set my tool bag down, took out a flashlight, and shone it around. I saw the main valve near the far wall. I climbed on a short step ladder to get a better look at the damaged sections of pipe. That's when I heard something that made me pause. I heard a voice say, "Gary." At first I thought it was my imagination. I switched off my flashlight and stood still. The room was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. I tried to see if someone was in the hallway. I leaned toward the door, but I didn't see or hear anything else. I shook my head and told myself it was just the old pipes making weird sounds. I flicked the flashlight back on and resumed my inspection a few minutes later. The voice came again, this time. It felt closer, almost right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead and my palms got clammy. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice bounced off the walls. No answer. It seemed ridiculous, but I could have sworn I heard my own name. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself the basement was playing tricks on me. Old buildings do that. Sometimes I forced myself to focus on the job. I replaced a section of pipe, tightened a few joints, and made sure nothing else was leaking. I turned off the main valve for a moment to check the water flow. Everything seemed normal. I was about to climb down the ladder when I noticed a crack in the far corner of the room. It wasn't on the ceiling or the walls. It was on the floor. Near some old shelves, I hopped down and walked over to it. The floor looked uneven, and I thought maybe there was an opening or a loose panel. I knocked on it with the handle of my screwdriver. It made a hollow sound. The next thing I knew, the floor shifted under my weight and I stumbled forward. I caught myself before falling, but I realized I was standing on a hidden panel. It was made of old wood. It looked like it had been part of a trappo or a hatch of some sort. I'm not usually a curious guy, but something about this made me forget my usual caution. I grabbed a crowbar from a nearby shelf, wedged it under the wood, and PRI it up. A foul smell hit my face. It reminded me of wet earth and mold. I saw a gap beneath the panel. I shone my flashlight inside and realized there was a passageway. The walls inside looked like stone. The space was cramped, but it looked like it went deeper under the building. I felt a chill run through me in my head. I argued with myself I had no obligation to explore that passage. I was just a plumber hired to fix leaks, but I felt drawn to it. I told myself I had to check if there were any old pipes down there causing the moisture problem. I pulled out my phone to see if I had a signal. Nothing. I tried the flashlight again, making sure the batteries were fresh. Then I lowered myself onto the ledge and jumped down. The air was stale and thick. The passage was barely wide enough for me to move. Without brushing the walls, my boots slipped a bit on the damp ground. Stones jutted out at odd angles, and I bumped my shoulders as I inched forward. The passage sloped down. The flashlight beam illuminated a rough path ahead. Old bits of wood and debris crunched under my feet. My heart was pounding and my ears felt hot. I was uneasy, but I kept going after maybe 10 steps. I reached a larger space. The ceiling rose and the walls opened up into something like a small chamber. I saw old bricks stacked around the edges as if someone had tried to seal off parts of the area. I also saw metal pipes overhead. They connected to the building's foundation, but they branched off into these older tunnels. It was hard to tell what everything was for. I moved the light around slowly, trying to get a full picture. I spotted an opening on the opposite side of the chamber. The darkness in that tunnel was intense. I felt a breeze coming from it, which meant there was a source of a somewhere. That's when I heard the voice again. Gary, it sounded soft, but this time it seemed to echo around the chamber. I felt my hand shake. I swallowed hard. Trying to calm myself, there was nobody there. I aimed my flashlight in all directions, calling out, "Who's down here?" My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. I took a step forward, shining the light into the next tunnel. The voice spoke again. "Come this way." It felt like it was right in my ear, but I still saw nobody. I started to doubt my sanity. I wondered if maybe I was breathing in fumes or mold spores that made me hear things. But the voice was too clear. It was definitely a human voice. I thought about going back, but I was already in too deep. My curiosity took over. I wanted to figure out what was happening. I felt a mix of dread and excitement. My stomach twisted, but I stepped into the next tunnel. The walls here were narrower. The air felt colder. My flashlight caught glimpses of strange markings etched into the stone. They looked like small crosses and random letters carved in a messy way. I felt my pulse race. My knees felt weak, but I kept walking. The tunnel curved and I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. After a few more steps, I reached another chamber. This one was bigger, maybe the size of a small room. There were old wooden planks on the ground and some broken tools that looked ancient. Rust covered everything. I spotted a few thick pipes. Crossing overhead, they rattled a bit, releasing droplets that fell onto my jacket. I heard a hiss, then a gurgling sound like water flowing through them. My flashlight flickered. The batteries were new, but the light dimmed for a second, then came back. I felt a surge of panic. I had a spare flashlight in my bag, but it was back in the basement room. I cursed under my breath, hoping my main flashlight would last. I heard the voice again. It was a whisper now, speaking my name over and over, Gary, Gary. It felt like it was circling the chamber, bouncing from wall to wall. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source. My footsteps crunched on the loose debris. I looked at the ground and noticed something metal sticking out of the dirt. I knelt down and brushed some of the dirt away, revealing a small rusted plaque. It had letters on it, but they were too worn to read clearly. Then I heard a scraping sound behind me. I jumped up and spun around, aiming the flashlight. I saw a faint shape move along the far wall, but the shape vanished as soon as the light hit that area. My breathing became shaky. My palms were slick with sweat. The voice was gone. The place went silent except for the drip of water and my own heartbeat thooing in my ears. I looked around for any sign of a living person but found none. I moved the flashlight over the walls. That's when I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were older pipes leading into a sealed section of the wall. The bricks looked newer than the rest of the chamber they were stacked in. A rough patchwork like someone had quickly sealed an opening. I walked over to it, put my ear against the bricks, and listened at first. I only heard my own breath, then I heard a faint sound like a deep sigh. It came from behind the bricks. My mind raced. I thought maybe there was a hidden room behind that wall, but the manager never mentioned any of this. I wondered if he even knew I decided I had to see what was behind it. I felt an urgency to uncover whatever secrets lay there. My gut twisted and my head felt light, but I started prying at the bricks with the edge of my flashlight trying to loosen them. It was slow work and the bricks were heavy. I managed to dislodge one or two. Dust filled the air, making me cough. My heart pounded even harder after removing a few bricks. I could see a gap inside. I aimed my flashlight through the hole on the other side. There was another chamber smaller with a low ceiling. The flashlight revealed metal. Rings in the walls, they looked like anchors for chains. There was a small wooden stool in the corner, rotted with age. A coil of chain lay on the floor, rusted and tangled. My blood ran cold. The place felt disturbing, like something awful once happened there. I stepped back, feeling the breath catch in my throat. The voice returned closer than ever. It said, "They did terrible things here, Gary." My flashlight flickered again, then stabilized. I felt a knot in my chest. I didn't want to stay any longer. I backed away from the wall, keeping my eyes on that hole. My pulse hammered in my temples. The air felt heavier. My knees shook. I turned and hurried back the way I came, through the narrow tunnel, past the strange carvings. Back to the first chamber, my flashlight beam jittered on the walls as my hand trembled. I stumbled on loose stones, but kept going. I heard faint whispers behind me as if they followed me. The voice repeated my name, but I refused to look back. My only goal was to get out of there. My breathing was ragged and my legs ached from the awkward crouch I had to maintain. When I reached the chamber with the wooden hatch, I scrambled up and grabbed the edge of the open floor panel. I pulled myself back into the basement's maintenance room and slammed the panel shut. My hands fumbled as I tried to fit the hatch back into place. I didn't care if it was perfect, I just wanted to seal it. I stood there panting, staring at the closed panel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. I looked at my watch and saw that I'd been down there for almost an hour. Though it felt longer, I gathered my tools with shaky hands. I wiped the sweat off my face. My breath still came in quick bursts. I didn't want to stay in that basement for another second. I turned off the main valve again and grabbed my stuff and made my way up the stairs. My mind replayed the sight of that sealed chamber and the chains on the walls. When I reached the lobby, the manager was nowhere to be seen. I left a note on the reception desk. I explained that I fixed the leaky pipe, but recommended an inspection of the basement structure. I didn't mention the hidden tunnels. I didn't mention the voice. I figured nobody would believe me, and I didn't want to return to that place. I just wanted to leave. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt the cool air hit my sweaty skin. My nerves were shot and my stomach churned. I walked to my van, threw my tools in the back, and sat behind the wheel. I locked the doors. Even though it was broad daylight, I started the engine and took one last look at the building. The windows looked old and lifeless, like they hid secrets behind every curtain. Part of me wanted to forget everything I saw. Another part of me felt a sick curiosity about what else might be hidden underneath those floors. I drove away, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with thoughts of the voice calling my name, the strange bricks, and the hidden room. I kept hearing those whispers in my head for days afterward. I had nightmares about narrow tunnels and distant echoes. Sometimes I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I still heard someone whispering Gary in the darkness. I never returned to that building. I told my supervisor I wasn't comfortable doing any more jobs there. He didn't ask why, he just assigned me somewhere else. I don't know if the manager ever called another plumber to investigate the basement further. Part of me hopes they sealed everything up. Another part of me doubts it will ever truly stay hidden. I suspect those tunnels existed long before the current owners had any idea what lay beneath and the voice in those tunnels. I can't explain it. I only know it was real enough to terrify me. That's my story. I saw things in those tunnels that made my skin crawl, and I heard a voice that knew my name before I even realized I wasn't alone. I'm still not sure if I was dealing with something supernatural or if it was just the echo of some dark event from the past. I do know that I won't ever go looking for answers down there again. I fixed the leak that was my job, but I learned that not all problems in a building are about pipes and valves. Sometimes the walls and floors hide secrets better left alone. If anyone else wants to dig deeper, they can. I'm done. I don't need to hear that voice again. I still remember the moment I stepped off the bus. The air felt thicker than usual and my shirt clung to my back. I was in this old colonial town because I wanted a change of scenery, nothing more. I wasn't prepared for the strange events that would unfold once I checked into that ancient hotel right from the start. Something about that place made my stomach tighten. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the sensation felt like a knot under my ribs. I ignored it at first because I needed a place to stay, and the Hotel Colonial was the only option that fit my budget. Now I realize I should have paid more attention to my instincts. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was low and its light stretched across the cobblestone streets. The town looked picturesque in that golden light, but the buildings cast long shadows. The hotel stood on a corner with large wooden doors and tall windows with iron bars. The facade had faded paint and small cracks running across the walls. When I pushed open the heavy door, the hinges groaned. A single overhead light illuminated the lobby, revealing worn rugs and a wooden check-in desk. A ceiling fan spun slowly above a set of leather chairs. I noticed the musty smell right away, like old wood mixed with a bit of mildew. The manager greeted me with a polite nod. He was a tall, thin man with sunken cheeks and short gray hair. He wore a vest that looked a bit too big for him. His voice was soft, but it echoed around the empty space. I told him my name, and he checked my reservation in a leather-bound ledger. There was no computer in sight. He handed me a brass key with a tag that read Room 14. Then he told me the room was on the second floor at the end of the hallway. I took the narrow staircase. The steps creaked under my feet, and the railing wobbled a little whenever I put any weight on it. The walls on the staircase were lined with old portraits of stern-looking men and women. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I climbed. When I reached the second floor, I turned left and walked to the very end of the hallway. The corridor smelled stale, and a single light bulb flickered overhead. The doors all had brass numbers nailed to them. Mine was the last one on the right. The key jammed a bit in the lock, so I had to wiggle it. I pushed open the door and flipped the light switch. A single overhead lamp lit the room. The furniture was old. There was a wooden dresser with peeling varnish, a small desk near the window, and a bed with a tall headboard carved with FL oral designs. The air inside felt stiff, and my first thought was to open a window, but the shutters seemed stuck. I tugged on them, and they finally gave way. With a scraping sound, a slight breeze entered, carrying the scent of dust and distant cooking fires from the street below. I dropped my bag and sat on the bed. The mattress felt firm, and the sheets looked clean but well-worn. My body felt tired from the bus ride, so I decided to freshen up. The bathroom door was right next to the dresser inside. The sink had a stained porcelain bowl, and the faucet squeaked. When I turned it on, the water ran cold and clear. I splashed some on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked bloodshot, and I felt a mild headache forming at my temples. I wiped my face, then walked back into the room. I noticed the walls had patches of discoloration near the corners. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Night came faster than I expected. I had a quick dinner at a small cafe across the street, then returned to my room. The hallway lights were dim, and I heard soft music echoing from the lobby. There was no one else around back inside. I shut the door and flicked on the overhead lamp as I changed into more comfortable clothes. I thought I heard a faint shuffling sound coming from behind the walls. It reminded me of something dragging or sliding, but it was too faint to identify clearly. I paused and listened. The The sound stopped. I shrugged it off and told myself it was probably an old pipe or some rodent in the walls. I turned out the light and lay on the bed. The sheets felt a bit cold. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness because there was only a small sliver of moonlight coming through the open shutters. I was about to drift off when I heard the floor creak near the door. My body tensed and I sat up. My heart pounded and then I felt a rush of heat spread through my chest. I stared at the spot where I thought the sound came from, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness made everything look flat and lifeless. Then I heard what sounded like a whisper. It was soft, like a breath. Not a clear voice. I couldn't pick out words or any real meaning. It just sounded like someone exhaling close to my ear. I jumped out of bed, flipped the light back on, and scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place. The door was still shut. The window was open, but there was nobody outside. My ears started ringing a bit, and I realized I was breathing heavily. I forced myself to calm down and check the bathroom. It was empty. I even looked behind the curtains. Nothing. Finally, I told myself I was just jumpy because the hotel was old and unfamiliar. I turned the light off again and tried to sleep. My dreams were restless, filled with strange shapes I couldn't identify. I kept waking up sweating and uneasy. At one point, I felt like someone was watching me from the corner of the room, but whenever I sat up, I only saw the same worn furniture the next morning. I woke up later than I planned. The sun was shining through the shutters and my body felt sore, like I hadn't slept properly. I took a quick shower, got dressed, and went downstairs for breakfast. The dining area was a small room next to the lobby. It had a few tables and simple chairs. I sat down and a woman brought me coffee and a plate with bread and fruit. She didn't speak much and she moved quietly around the tables. I looked around for other guests, but there were only empty tables. The manager wasn't there. I finished my meal and decided to explore the town during the day. The streets were bustling with tourists and locals. People sold handmade crafts, and there were small museums showcasing local history. I visited a couple of them. One described the colonial period and showed old photographs of the same streets I was walking on. I noticed a black and white photo of the Hotel Colonial. It looked almost the same except for a sign above the door that's no longer there. I read a small plaque under the photo. It mentioned that the hotel was once owned by a wealthy family that had left under mysterious circumstances. It didn't mention deaths or anything like that, but it implied there was an unresolved problem that made the family leave. I felt a mild chill when I realized my room might have been part of that history. I spent most of the afternoon wandering around, eating local snacks and checking out the architectural sites by sunset. My feet were tired and my head felt clouded from the heat. I returned to the hotel hoping for a better night's sleep. The hallway was empty again and I noticed that same stale smell. My footsteps echoed against the old floorboards and I felt a slight pressure in my chest. When I reached my door inside my room, I found that the shutters were open again, even though I remembered closing them before I left. I looked around to see if housekeeping had come in, but nothing else seemed touched. The bed was still unmade and my bag was in the same spot. I pulled the shutters shut again and locked them. Then I went to clean up in the bathroom while I was washing my face. I heard a small scrape on the room's floor. I froze my hands, still wet. I shut off the faucet and listened. The sound was brief, like a chair being moved slightly across the wooden boards. I dried my face on a towel and stepped out of the bathroom. The chair at the small desk was turned slightly away from the desk, like someone had shifted it. I knew I'd left it tucked in my throat, felt tight, and my palms started sweating. I approached the chair. I didn't see anything on it. Under it or around it, I slid it back in place and tried to shake off the nervous feeling. Night fell again. This time I felt determined to sleep, but also on edge. I had a single lamp on as I lay in bed, flipping through some local brochures. I'd grabbed the words blurred on the page because I couldn't concentrate. The silence weighed on me. It almost felt too quiet, like the entire building was holding its breath. I turned off the lamp around 11 p.m. and tried to rest sometime after midnight. I jolted awake. A cold draft blew across my arms, making the hairs on my skin stand up. I noticed the shutters were open again. My heart pounded and my mind raced with explanations. Maybe the lock was broken, or maybe I hadn't locked them properly. The curtains billowed slightly and the moonlight lit part of the floor. I saw a faint outline near the desk, like a vertical shape that seemed darker than the rest of the room. It moved slightly, then vanished as my eyes focused. I sat up so fast I felt a cramp in my side. My chest felt tight and my breathing was shallow. I flicked on the lamp and scanned the room. There was no one there. The door was still locked from the inside. I got up and went to the window. I yanked the shutters closed again and tested the latch several times. It seemed to catch, but I still felt uneasy. My hands shook a little as I backed away from the window. I could feel my heart beating in my neck. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. I didn't sleep much after that. I sat in bed with the lamp on. Listening for every small noise. Around 3 in the morning, I heard whispers. This time they seemed to come from near the dresser. They were low, like 2 or 3 voices speaking at once, but I couldn't make out any words. My scalp tingled and a wave of goosebumps ran down on my arms. I tried to muster the courage to check the dresser when I finally stood up. The whispers stopped. I stepped closer, opened the drawers, and looked inside. Nothing. I ran my hand along the back of the dresser. The wood felt rough and slightly damp. I heard a soft tap behind it, like something shifting. My chest felt tight again, and I felt an urgent need to back away at dawn. I finally got a short burst of sleep. The morning light came through the gaps in the shutters, and I woke up groggy and anxious. I decided to talk to the manager. Maybe he had some explanation for the strange things happening in room 14. I went downstairs and found him at the desk. He looked up and greeted me with a polite nod. I asked him if there had been any repairs done in my room or if housekeeping had been entering when I was out. He tilted his head and said they hadn't assigned any staff to my room yet because I hadn't requested full service. Then he looked away like he was choosing his words carefully. He told me the hotel had a long history. He mentioned stories of strange sights and sounds, especially in certain parts of the building. He admitted some guests reported hearing whispers at night. He didn't seem surprised by my experience. That made me uneasy. I asked him if there was any record of what had happened in the past. He shrugged and said some old documents might exist in the back-off office, but they weren't available to the public. His manner was polite, but he seemed to want to change the subject. I spent the rest of the day in town, but I couldn't enjoy myself. My mind was stuck on what I'd heard and seen. By late afternoon, I decided to check out a local archives building. The clerk there allowed me to look through old newspapers. I found a mention of the hotel's original owner. It said he had left abruptly and never returned. It also said something about a Miss Heirloom. The articles hinted that the property might have been sold under unusual circumstances. There were no details on what exactly happened, just vague references to disputes and unresolved conflicts. Nobody was reported dead, but it sounded messy. I returned to the hotel that evening feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The hallway was quiet again, and the same flickering bulb cast a weak glow on the old wallpaper. When I reached my room, I hesitated before unlocking the door. My hand shook a little. I stepped inside, flipped on the light, and braced myself for something odd. The shutters were closed, the bed was as I'd left it, and the chair was in its normal position, but the air felt colder than before. It reminded me of standing near a drafty window on a cold night. Except the weather outside was warm, I started to investigate the room more thoroughly. I pushed the dresser away from the wall. The wood scraped against the floor and dust filled the air. My throat felt scratchy and my eyes watered behind the dresser. There was a narrow gap in the wall, like a small recess inside. I found an old piece of fabric bunched up. It looked like part of a cloth bag or maybe a pouch. I reached in and grabbed it. It felt brittle, and a small cloud of dust flew off. It had some sort of embroidered pattern. I couldn't see any items inside it. It was empty. I placed it on the bed and tried to smooth it out. The edges were frayed and the embroidery looked like the initials, but they were faded. It could have been the family's monogram. My stomach felt twisted and my hands felt clammy. Something about this pouch felt connected to the whispers. I didn't know how or why, but I felt certain I stuffed it in my backpack. Feeling a shiver across my shoulders, then I pushed the dresser back against the wall that night. I waited in the room with the lamp on around midnight. I heard the familiar whispers this time. They sounded closer, like they were just behind the headboard. I clutched the embroidered pouch. A sudden idea popped into my mind. Maybe these voices wanted the missing item back. I didn't know if that was true, but I was desperate. I got up, placed the pouch on the desk, and spoke out loud. My voice cracked. I said something like, "Is this what you're looking for?" I felt foolish, but I kept going. The whispers stopped the hairs on my arms, stood up, and I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I waited, heart pounding. A moment later, the air felt lighter. The cold draft lifted. It was like the tension in the room eased up. I stayed awake for another hour listening. The whispers didn't return. I eventually fell asleep. With the lamp still on the next morning, I woke up feeling more rested than I had in days. I half expected to see the shutters open again, but they were still locked. The embroidered pouch sat on the desk untouched. I decided to leave it on the dresser as I left for breakfast in the dining area. I ate quickly and kept to myself. I didn't mention the pouch or the whispers to anyone. When I returned to my room, everything felt still. The air was normal, the cold draft was gone, and there were no signs of any tampering. I grabbed my bag, took one last look at that old embroidered pouch, and decided to leave it where I found it. Inside that gap behind the dresser, I nudged the dresser back into place, making sure it was lined up with the wall. Then I locked the shutters and double-checked the latch that night. There were no whispers, no shifting chairs, and no strange shapes. I slept with the lamp off. The relief felt almost overwhelming. The next day, I packed my things, checked out, and headed to my next destination. I didn't get all the answers about the hotel's history, but I sensed that pouch belonged there. Maybe I put it back where it was meant to be, or maybe I just convinced myself I had either way. The haunting presence in that room seemed satisfied, and I left that old hotel with the feeling that I'd resolved something even now. When I think about the Hotel Colonial, I feel that twinge of fear in my chest. But I also remember that cold draft lifting and the way the whispers suddenly stopped. I can't explain any of it, but I know it was real. If anyone ever asks me about the strangest place I've stayed, I always mention room 14 at the Hotel Colonial. I describe the soft whispers, the chilling draft, and the uneasy nights. I also mention how in the end I found that old embroidery pouch behind the dresser. I don't claim to know what it all meant, but I'll never forget how it felt, and that's all there is to forever.